Good morning. If I could ask everyone to take their seats, we'll get started today. So good morning again. My name is Megan Phelan, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to this exciting event sponsored by EurekAlert and AAAS, the nonprofit science society. I joined AAAS last year to serve as the Science Press Package Director, and every week we depend on the good work of many PIOs to further our mission of communicating science more broadly. So I'm looking forward to meeting many of you after the meeting today. Before we begin, I'd like to thank our EurekAlert hosts, Patrick McGinnis, Director of EurekAlert, and Senior Communications Officer, Jennifer Santisi. I'd also like to acknowledge the Director of the Office of Public Programs, Ginger Pinholster, and my colleagues Jennifer Anderson and Natasha Pinole. Today's event features a great panel of exciting speakers, and we hope you will find their conversation valuable. I'd now like to introduce our moderator, Robert Lee Hotz, science writer at the Wall Street Journal. I'll say a few words to kickstart today's event. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Megan. Well, first of all, welcome and good morning, everyone. And I can see by your presence here this morning you have already mastered the first and key lesson of news and social media, which is never sleep. Now, the technology of social media offers a spectacular opportunity for anyone, and I do mean anyone, who wants to get the word out. Consider the interactive response to the Mars Curiosity landing a little more than a year ago. NASA officially called the descent to the surface of Mars of this $2.5 billion mobile robot 7 minutes of hell. But this 7 minutes generated 1.2 billion Twitter messages, 17.4 million Facebook hits, 36.4 million webcast streams, and during the actual landing itself, 3.2 million viewers on Ustream TV. Now, that's more than the combined audiences of online cable news. The actual 140-character message that announced the landing itself, Gale Crater, I am in you, was retweeted 72,000 times. All told, the mission website received 127 million page views. Now, that's not bad for 7 minutes' work. So the media team at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, who was in charge of this, had already thought their strategy through. They had prepared for this. They had laid out their social media tripwires. And when events played their way, they were prepared. So this morning, our goal here is to help you be better prepared. And we have, if I may say, a fairly remarkable panel of science journalists and editors here this morning, all of whom are going to share their best ideas and tips with you about how to surf social media. The way this is going to work, we're going to scroll through a series of presentations, and then we're going to set aside a good chunk of time for a conversation about this, for your questions and their smart answers. So as we go through this, write down your curiosity thing about what did they mean by that, or how would that work for my group, and we'll get to them at the end. We want to hear from you. So to lead off, we have a very special correspondent from Atlanta, Elizabeth Landau, who's a writer and producer for CNN News. She's been there since 2008. She's a graduate of Princeton University and the Columbia University Graduate School of Journalism. She's a novelist. And she's covered a number of scientific topics at CNN, from the Higgs boson this year, of course, to the Curiosity rover that I was just talking about, to mammals, to brain disorders. Now, I have read that she has said that her favorite number is pi, but I actually suspect her favorite number is 140. Because that is, of course, the number of characters in a Twitter message, and she runs the at CNN Light Years Twitter account. So, Elizabeth? My bad. So this is the part where I say the second most important thing about social media when you send out the message for help. I'm not sure which one it is.
I think if you go there, and then...
Well, see, we're set up. You're queued up here. Yeah, thank you. There's another button I need to hit, and I just can't find it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I've got it queued up. No, Elizabeth, yeah, right? Yeah, oh, that one, okay, thank you, there we go. My apologies.
Hi, thanks so much for being here. I'm going to talk about how press officers and science journalists can collaborate better and use social media to get the messages out there that are important to the public. So the first question you might have is, how can I find a science journalist? And social media is basically a bonanza of journalists, especially science journalists. Twitter offers a wide variety of publications that have their own Twitter accounts, as well as writers with individual Twitter accounts. And a lot of writers, especially science writers, have Twitter lists. And I find Twitter lists to be one of the most important tools in finding people that I want to talk to. So I'm going to show you how that works. For example, if you look at the account that I manage, CNN Light Years, which has all of our science stories, you go to the left-hand bar here and you click on Lists. Sorry. Sign into Twitter, have an account. Okay, so if you go to somebody's profile page, thanks. Sorry, it's being a bit slow. Okay, so here's me. If you go on the left-hand side to lists, what you're going to see are groups of Twitter accounts that I find important in various areas. So you can see different science communicators, different people who deal in nuclear physics. That was a topic that I was covering once. Music, and also health news is another one of my beats. So this is a way for you to see what beats different journalists find important. But potentially more valuable is when you go over here, so you can see what list there's actually a member of. So if I am a science journalist, I'm probably a member of a lot of different lists that were created by other people. So journalists, bloggers, health reporters, science, these are all resources where you can find dozens and dozens of other reporters that cover the same kinds of topics. So back to our presentation. Facebook and LinkedIn are also really valuable resources for finding out who is out there, who is covering the topics that you want to talk about. For example, the Science Writers LinkedIn group has more than 6,100 members, which suggests that there are more than 6,100 people out there who are communicating science. There's also the old-fashioned way of finding science journalists, which is in person. I think that the AAAS annual meeting is actually one of the most valuable resources for connecting with people, where press officers and journalists are in the same room together and they're all interested in learning about things and meeting each other. The NASW meeting is also a good place. There are lots of conferences for different subject areas such as neuroscience, astronomy, and cancer. There are local journalism meetups in your community where you can find journalists to connect with, as well as local science education meetups. So what, as science writers, are we looking for? I would say first, to be very short and snappy in your pitches. I think the point of the story should be clear in the first 2 sentences. Unfortunately, we get thousands of emails every day. The subject line and the first 2 sentences are crucial and have to be in easy to understand terms. People like me cover so many different subject areas that it's very hard to keep really technical jargon in our heads all the time. So make it clear and easy, and make sure that you're highlighting how is your pitch different from other topics that might be pitched that day, and how is it new. Organizations like CNN value the news. So, even if you're pitching a feature, we like to have features that somehow relate to something that is new. And finally, why would the average person, why would your mother want to read this story? That's something that we ask ourselves at CNN.com all the time, and that's something for you to keep in mind as well. With the advent of the internet, images are more important than ever in news stories. You can look at a newspaper and you can see lots of stories without images, but when you go to the average web story, you're bound to see a big picture at the top, and that's especially true at CNN. If you look at a lot of different home pages, you'll see that they are organized visually. So as press officers, you do us a very valuable service by providing images that go along with stories. Before you send them, make sure that any organization that wants to has the rights to use that image, make sure the copyright is cleared. The more image options, the better, and the higher resolution, the bigger, the better, because we're now working with multiple platforms. We have stories that appear on the iPad, on smartphones, different tablets. The fact that people are viewing images on so many different platforms means that we have to start with a huge raw image and one that is quite compelling. So that's something to keep in mind. Another thing that I don't think people realize is that when you're working for a news website that values images, when you're choosing between different stories to highlight, you'll often go with the news story that has the better image. It's almost as important as the headline, sometimes even more. So again, when you're pitching stories, when you're coming up with press releases, when you're asking scientists to provide you information, make sure that you have the best image possible to go with it, and as many images as possible. Finally, you can promote your images via social media. I think that NASA does an amazing job of this, putting out images of the day, the individual accounts such as the Mars Curiosity account, tweeting out images from Mars. These are ways that science journalists like me become aware of them, and we can feature them on our own blogs and websites. This is a story I wanted to highlight by one of my colleagues, Laura Smith-Spark, that was on the CNN homepage for 2 days, and I think that one of the reasons why is that this image, this very compelling but yet very simple image of a lonely planet in a vast expanse of space, was so compelling not only to readers but to editors that we left it up there and we let people keep clicking on it and keep clicking on it, and it got more than 10,000 Facebook recommendations, which is really quite impressive. And this is not a photograph. This is an illustration that came out of the University of Hawaii and these scientists. And, I think that if more illustrations could be provided to journalists, that would also do us a great service and help get stories out there. We're also very interested in the human angle of stories. If there is a human impact of something that you're pitching, make that abundantly clear, especially in the first couple of paragraphs. I do a lot of medical reporting, and I like to find real patients who exemplify the disease that is being researched or the treatment that is being explored. If you can make real people available in some way connected to a story that you're pitching, that's very helpful to us and very interesting to us. And if there is no human element, if it's just about a planet out there, appeal to our curiosity. This vast expanse of the universe, there's this little planet that's out there without stars. I mean, if there's something that genuinely makes you say, wow, that's really cool, that's what we're looking for, that's what's going on in our heads too. we're always looking for sources. We want the contact information of sources for not just new studies that are coming out, but also news events that might have scientific angles. I like it when press officers are able to make those sources available to me immediately, because when you're working for a 24-hour news network that wants to get the word out there as fast as possible, we're all working on deadlines that are just kind of ASAP. And when you have a news organization with many different platforms associated with it, with TV and the web, we want our sources to be available to go on camera if that's desired. Sometimes we're looking for very specific people that you could help us find. And if you have any celebrities, we always like celebrities. This is me with Ozzy and Sharon Osbourne. We like to pitch off the news. So when a major world event occurs, science reporters are sometimes tasked with finding a relevant angle. So natural disasters, disease outbreaks, traumatic events, when press officers are able to say, we're aware of this major world event that's happened. Here are some experts who can talk about the science or the health angle of it. That's really valuable to people like me. And the timing of that is really key, because if sources or pitches are offered, 2 days after news breaks, that can be too late, especially also when it comes to scientific studies that have embargoes associated with them. If I get a pitch after an embargo breaks, I'm less likely to cover it than if I got that pitch before the embargo broke. So, as soon as you're aware of something, I think it's really important to contact your journalist lists immediately. And, hopefully all of us do respect embargoes. If you have an expert you know of who is about to publish a book, you could tell us about that, pitch an interview about that. If there are any conferences coming up where people from your institution are represented, or a conference that's nearby or at your institution, tell us about that. And if you're able to offer exclusive, that's always good too. I think journalists like me, who are getting thousands of emails a day, we have very little time to answer the phone, and I definitely don't really answer the phone. So please don't call me unless it's really important. And that's not being rude. That's just the fact that when you work for a high-pressure news organization, you're just at your desk answering emails all day. And I actually sometimes regret that good things do come over the phone. We just don't have time to answer that phone. So that's my face after 6 voicemails. So know the publication that you're pitching to. If you're pitching to a news writer, that person might not write a lengthy feature. If you're pitching to a medical writer, that person might not care about an astronomy pitch. And it's very sad when I get an email that says, I have this great story for you. It was just on CNN. So obviously we don't cover things 2 days in a row like that. And you can, do a web search to see, has this been covered by different websites, so that you'll know the context. And how I use social media personally, I look at Twitter every day. I look at Facebook as well to see, what's popular today. I promote my own stories. I make lists of Twitter accounts that I follow, as I was talking about, and categorize them, which is useful not only to me but also to you. And I think that looking at what people share on Facebook, seeing the same kinds of stories being shared by the same kinds of people, that can be really valuable information. And I also connect with people on LinkedIn who I meet at conferences. And I think that press officers have a lot of opportunity in social media as well. You can have institutional Twitter accounts with links to public news releases. You can offer experts to do Twitter chats. You can host a discussion about a topic on Twitter. As I mentioned before, you can follow science journalists on social media to see what kinds of stories are they doing. And when you pitch to them, you'll already know, okay, this is exactly the person who would be most likely to do this story. Thank you very much.
was a lot of very good stuff in that presentation, and I just want to reiterate that there is perhaps a special circle of hell for university and institutional public affairs people who pitch a story by sending you an email that then nicely links all the other stories that everybody else has already written on your topic. That just really gets your day off to a good start. So, yes, I've mastered this. So, I hope you took notes for that. Now, our next speaker, David Freeman, is the senior science editor at the Huffington Post, which is, I'm sure most of you know, has really pioneered web-based journalism and web-based science journalism. Now, before joining the enterprise of HuffPo, he was managing editor of the health section at CBSNews.com. Now, he's written extensively on science and health topics, including Reuters, for WebMD, for Consumer Reports, Reader's Digest, and Men's Health. So he has been forged in the trial and error of evolving social media. And let me just get his presentation queued up here, and I will then ask you to join me in welcoming David, because I'm eager to hear what he has to say.
Yeah, trial and error is right. That's the kind of way it works in social media especially. So hello, everybody. It's great to be here, and eager to share some ideas that I have about social media, but of course I'm here as well to learn and trying to take notes when you're talking, thinking all the things I didn't quite know. And because it's always a continuous learning process, and no matter how much you know, there's always more to know. And I've learned that in a big way at Huffington Post, which really does have obviously a very robust approach to social media. And I want to say also, just in the 2 years that I've been at Huffington Post, there's been a dramatic shift. When I got there, we still do this. We design the pages. I mean, we put out a page on the main page, Huffington Post, or on Huffington Post Science. You know, I want to have a great collection of headlines, a great collection of images, so that when people come to that page, and people do seek out that page, type in that URL, they want to come and read the stuff. But increasingly, people have shifted away from the coming to the pages. It's all done socially. So, which is, you know, as I said, a pretty dramatic shift just in the last couple of years to start thinking about how to reimagine stories so they don't work not just on the page, but socially, and that affects the way we write headlines, among a number of other things. So anyway, next few minutes, I'm going to try to give you, and I approached this presentation a little bit like a Huffington Post kind of a story, which is lighthearted, hopefully fun. I guess I'll find out. But before that, I thought I would start with a good suck up, which is you guys already do a pretty good job. I mean, you know, anything that I can say, I think is just going to be of incremental help to you. I don't think I'm going to tell you any great secrets, but I think the point is, and that's the way I approach my job. There are lots and lots of people who have Post who know a lot more about social media than I do, and there's always a give and take, and so that's kind of part of the game. But now for the secrets. So, and I'm going to talk about press releases in a way because that's very closely linked to social media. A lot of the elements that help us social stories show up in the press links. So the first thing is that, you know, this maybe is not the best image. We're not so much that we're lazy, but we're busy. Everyone is incredibly busy, and anything that you can do to make our lives easier is great. So in press releases, when you put out press releases, if you would think about everything we need to know, not just to write the story, but to promote it. Because when we get finished, we do a great story. It really doesn't do anything unless we get it promoted. And at Huffington Post, we have a very robust social media schedule. We tweet for science at least a post every 24 hours. I mean 24 times a day. 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, we're tweeting, we're socialing, putting up posts. Because that's what it takes to drive people to traffic. So if you have, you know, I don't know if some of you may be doing this, and there may be constraints that I don't quite understand about what you can and cannot do, but if you put your own Twitter handle in there, put the Twitter handle of the scientist, put everything in there, pictures, images, videos, everything that you think might be of benefit. And if you're going to, and you know, I've always wondered about canned quotes, the quotes that appear in press releases. I wonder how many of them actually get said. Hopefully, they really do get said by the people who say them. But in any case, if you are going to use quotes, however real they are, please try to make them sound like someone actually uttered those words, because sometimes they don't. And that's no fun when you're, I mean, obviously, we always try to have the time to get fresh quotes, get people on the phone, or answer some questions via email. But if we don't, we do have to rely on quotes that are in a press release. It's really kind of it makes you feel bad when you're putting out stuff that feels fake. Second, so I'm not quite sure who this person is, if it's if it's you guys or if it's us, I don't know. But anyway, obviously, and again, I'm ignorant about this, but I assume that the scientists are more or less closely involved with you all when you're putting together press releases. But it's great if you give them a heads up, because I don't know how many times there's been a new press release, I want to get in touch with someone, and I have to go hunting around and try to find out how to reach that person. Or I call them, they're not available. I put an email, tweet them, whatever. I can't get in touch with them, and that's frustrating. It slows down the story. So if you could, and again, I don't know, there might be constraints that I don't understand, but if you can give the researchers whose work is featured in the press releases a heads up, let people know, they're going to be trying to reach you. Make yourself easy to reach. That would be awesome. And I was saying here also, if you encourage them to write about their work, I mean, they may want, a lot of people whose names we see, a lot of researchers' names we see in press releases, we invite to blog, because it's a great way they can escape the peer review process. They can write more casually, and I think sometimes they want to do that, and that's great for readers too, to try to get, to read about things in a broader context. Obviously, this is what Liz was just saying, the good visuals, which are critical. And don't forget about videos, and if you have multiple images, great. If you include a video, that's great. And if you do a video, I see a lot of videos that shows scientists talking about the research, which just dies on the page. No one really wants to see talking heads, unless there is a dramatic personal story or something like that, or they're talking about with great passion what they discovered or what their findings were. Another thing, don't undersell the story. A lot of times, this is going to sound familiar, but we have such time pressure. We read and see so many headlines, press releases, hundreds, I guess, a day, and so you have to find a way to make them stand out. And the key is to be accurate, obviously, but to be playful. And I've had to learn that too, because I came of age in a time when things were a little bit more serious, and now even serious medical or scientific findings of any sort can be presented in a pretty playful way. Without that, it engages people broadly on social, so that's critical to be clever. So here, and I apologize, I don't believe anyone's in here who had anything to do with these, but here's some things. Here's some actual titles of press releases that didn't really grab me. Americans, so just look at these. I don't know. Yeah, I guess this sounds like maybe mom. Mom and Dad might want to know about that, but I didn't want to know about it. Actually, I did click on that because I want to know what the heck that was about, but we didn't write about it. This is my favorite. So, I guess, yeah, really, whatever. On the other hand, don't oversell the story, because I've also found, and it must be great pressure to put together these press releases to do things that really do grab people. And I've also started, we have such little time. I might literally see a press release and go, I know a great headline. A lot of time I think in terms of headlines. What's a great headline? And I think, this is a fun headline, so let me figure out what the story is to support that headline. And I've come across many times I've dived into writing, starting to arrange things on my page, in a story, and then I reread the press release a few times and find out it wasn't about that at all. People are overselling things. So if you oversell stuff, it turns us off and it wastes our time, which makes us not like you guys. So anyway, and metaphors is fun too. We talk about this. I was keeping a collection of metaphors used in press releases. I don't have that with me, but obviously they're great for explaining things like, I don't know, Higgs boson, right? God particle. A lot of people didn't like that. Some people did, but they're all, especially physics and astronomy, it's hard to explain things. But if you're going to use metaphors, make sure they really work. This one didn't. This was an actual headline. I wasn't really clear on what this was about. I know about. Anyway, and now on to social media. Tweeting a lot. So as I said, at Huffington Post, we're tweeting stories. Every story we put out a tweet 24 times, or we're tweeting 24/7. And you can do the same thing too. I don't know all the constraints on you guys, but I think if you guys can establish a presence on Twitter, that's great. And it doesn't just have to be about your press releases. Anything that if you become kind of a presence on Twitter, people will retweet your stuff. You'll build your audience. You'll become a known quantity, and people want to see what you're talking about. And again, you can tweet all kinds of stuff. And if you see stuff that you like, you can retweet it too, which makes people like you. Because obviously, a lot of this is about getting clicks on the page, making stories get out there. And informality is, I don't know what this is about, informality is also part of, not just of social, but again on page too. So be playful, be informal, don't try to sound like a know-it-all, even if you are a know-it-all. And you don't have to tweet the titles of things. You can tweet sentences about, quotes from. There are all kinds of ways that you can tweet stuff. And if you keep things short, I mean, you got 140 characters, but you don't have to use that all. And if you keep it to 180 to 100, that gives room for people to add their own 2 cents, the 2 cents worth of which they like to do, to retweet. And obviously, you're going to use short links, and they look better. Short links look better. They save characters, and you can track your stats that way. So you can do, and I think that's another thing too. Is I look at this a bit as a game to see what works and what doesn't. It's really a fun game to see what attracts people and what doesn't. Obviously, this is something that you've heard before. You can target people. You can tweet directly at them. You can direct message on Twitter. I think this is going to change where you can direct message anyone. So it's really essentially like email. But right now, I believe it's set up to default so that they have to be following you. I haven't tried Muckrack, but someone just before I came here said that it was a valuable way to find Twitter handles. Hashtags are great too, especially trending hashtags. But if you if you go crazy with hashtags, you're going to turn people off. They look like spam, or they just kind of look like word soup, or lots of characters, and it just turns me off. So I don't know if other people are like that or not. And then again, there's not just Twitter. You can, if you have a YouTube channel, you can put up videos on a YouTube channel. Facebook is valuable too, obviously, as you heard. And all these things can help you build a brand. In my case, I mean, we use Instagram. We don't really use Pinterest at all. For me, I don't know, other people I disagree. LinkedIn is about me. It's about my career, to the extent that I have a career. But I don't want to get pitched really via LinkedIn. Last thing, and if there are other ways you can post things. In Reddit, you probably all know about Reddit, but I think it's a great place to post your stories. And I think the etiquette calls for you. I'm not quite sure how this works, but the etiquette calls for you to not just kind of be a hog. So if you're going to put up your stuff every day or something, people are not going to like that. But if you can post other things as well, then you become a good citizen of Reddit. So anyway, that's all. Thanks very much.
Well, that was great. Now, I wonder, there's kind of an underlying thread here that I hope you all are starting to pick up on, which is that as you engage in social media, you're putting yourself and your institution more out there as a potentially trusted or untrusted source. So you have to pay attention to your own credibility, to your own accuracy. In other words, you are starting to have to follow the same kinds of journalistic values that we do, because your Twitter may get directly retweeted without any intervening filter here. And if you make things up, that becomes news. That becomes very entertaining. If you exaggerate, all in a good cause, of course, you can find yourself in the middle of a very big boiling pot of Twitter hashtag soup. And it's not a pleasure. But that's something that I think I'm starting to hear underlying this. So our next speaker is perhaps one of, if not the most distinguished science writer working in America today. He's a science reporter for the New York Times, and there's probably not a part of their science coverage that in one way or other over the years has borne his fingerprints. He's been there since 1993. He was an editor of the New York Times Magazine. He was deputy science editor. He's editor of the Personnel Technology section. He's been an outdoors columnist, science columnist, editor of Science Times, of course, which helps set the gold standard for science coverage in the United States. And he joins us actually now, just coming back from his first attempt to cover the annual meeting of the Society for Neuroscience, which if any of you ever have dipped into that is one of the more challenging gatherings. But let me now ask Jim to come up and share his views on this Darwinian social media ecology.
So I'm at Jim Gorman, and I confess to feeling here a little bit under false pretenses since when I'm not really a Twitter expert. When I started covering science, I was using a typewriter, and it was an electric typewriter. I want to make that clear. Although when I started on newspapers, it was a manual typewriter. So, but I have been involved with the Times science coverage over a number of years and watched how it's evolved and how the Times has sort of used, gone from being, well, we still call it the paper, but gone from being, just strictly the gray lady. I was there when, color was introduced first to the printed pages, to trying to establish an online presence and, and doing well in some ways. So what I'll do is tell you a little bit about how we've used it, how reporters there use social media, and I'll make a plea at the end for a particular kind of thing that I'm now interested in, which is research video. But before I get to that, I'll just sort of talk a little bit about what we've done. I've been back and forth from editing to writing, so I've, done it on all sides. And there are certain writers that I've watched who have mastered this, particularly social media. So one of my Twitter guru, I guess, would be Carl Zimmer, at Carl Zimmer. He has like about 160,000 followers. I think I have 1,200. So and one of the things that he's mastered, which I think is not immediately obvious that's valuable when you're sending out tweets, and I don't know how much you can do it when you're representing an institution. He represents himself, but even though there's only 140 characters, there's a voice or a personality or an attitude that can make you a real presence in Twitter. So he has a mix of straight self-promotion, a lot of retweeting, dialogue with other people who were tweeting, and sometimes a kind of snarky attitude. I mean, he was just telling one person that he was cutting him off the list, saying, "I'm sorry, you've jumped the shark, goodbye." And so that kind of personality can come through even in 140 characters, and I think it makes people follow you. So as I said, that may have limits when you're working for an institution, so I'm not exactly sure how you'd apply that. One of the things that I'm going to talk about is how we've, not so much social media, but working online. So there was a period when and two things that are particularly important and have turned out to be particularly important, I think, for the Times. There was a period when we went blog crazy. Excuse me, and everybody had a blog. I mean, it was during the period when there were two things everybody had, a navel and a blog, and the Times was no different from anyone else. And so one of the blogs, I was involved in starting one blog, which did pretty well, but ultimately was not successful. It was called Scientists at Work, and it followed scientists in the field. And we dealt a lot with people representing universities and institutions because we wanted to cover the scientific process. This was not so much about results, but it was a chance to get direct. Well, I'll be blunt. We traded a Times platform for great pictures and accounts of exotic, work in rainforests and mountains and coral reefs and things like that. But what it did for the readers, viewers, followers of it was give a sense of what the process of science was. Not what a discovery was, but what a scientist was actually doing in the field. This wasn't in the lab. This was all field work because we were, again, and people have mentioned the importance of images, we were very interested in images. Screens are very hungry for images. And the blog was successful. It had a good following, but it was a fairly narrow audience. It didn't reach very wide. And eventually, we ran into the problem that although we had unlimited space, on the web, and we could use it to present to go beyond the news and present, direct voices from scientists. We didn't have unlimited time for the people who were putting this together. So other things took over, and that blog now is no longer. So we have to find a new way to get that same kind of sort of process information in. I started that when I was an editor of Science Times. Now I'm a reporter, and my approach is a little bit different. So now another blog that did something different, had a different audience, is the Well blog, which Tara Parker Pope started. And this has become much more than a blog. It's, I don't know whether you want to call it a destination or its own sort of little web magazine site, whatever. But it has, she did a couple of things that we really didn't do with scientists' work. I don't know if we could have, but she is amazingly good at reaching out to her audience and engaging with them. So there's a huge amount of input from her readers, viewers, followers, and there's also a tremendous amount of interaction. I know these are buzzwords, community and interaction, but she's done it very well, and they've worked incredibly well. So they've had, sort of you could train for a marathon with Tara. You could, they have recipes. They have the voices of people with different kinds of illnesses, and there's also room there for doctors to talk about the kind of things that they're working on. So I think those are two things that the kind of lessons from that are that this engagement with people, sort of who your audience is very valuable, and then again the interest in process. So the thing that I'm engaged in now, if I can find where I actually am here, is in thinking of how you're going to apply these lessons to more straight science reporting. Hard science, it's kind of hard to figure out the engagement part of it. I mean, we could sort of solicit our readers' views on string theory or the Higgs boson, but I get some of those views in the mail, and I don't think that's the direction we want to go, because the cosmology theories that I've received, I'm not a cosmologist, but I don't think they're on target, and they don't translate well to the web. They fill up the. In my experience, if something fills up the margins, it's like, if there's no room left on the paper because the idea is, then that's sort of something you don't want to pursue any further. But so one thing that we've done, which this doesn't really connect to social media, but it's about doing things online. We've got a new feature called Science Take, and this is not some amazing innovation that nobody's done before, but I think it was very well framed and very well conceived by the two people at the Times who did it, who sort of thought it up. And what's happened is that there's a lot more use, as I'm sure you know, of video by researchers, and that's both as a part of their research. I mean, and you're recording animal behavior, you're recording brain cells firing, you're doing animations of when you have a model of the brain, you may construct an animation that becomes a video of sorts. You have we used one video of bacteria in the ground communicating, how these soil bacteria are communicating with each other. So there's a lot of video that's essential to the research. Not talking heads, but that's really involved with the actual research. And we wanted to find a way to use that, as many other people were doing, to put it up on the web, both to get more viewers. We're hungry for video. And also, it gives people one thing that I think both social media and online presence are good for, is to give people an idea of the process of science. You get more a direct voice from the scientist, not necessarily the scientist speaking, but you get to see what they're doing. So the idea here was to do a minute, around a minute, maybe a minute and a half. As I said, we're not the first to do it. There was already 60-second science in a minute. There's all sorts of things out there. So, in fact, we struggled mightily to find a name for it. So it's called Scientifc because everybody else, had their minutes already. And it's very similar, really, to a traditional kind of little news nugget, something that's quirky, interesting, can be told very quickly, has a finding. There has to be some news. There always has to be something new. It can't just be cute animal videos, although we're not above using cute animal videos. I want to point that out. If you have any cute animal videos, send them along. And yeah, we have to be able to do it in a minute, but I'll show you one so that that probably tells it better. Now, the cute videos work well. The gruesome videos work even better. So I was going to show you one about yawning, but would you rather see the one about how a tick that's spreading Lyme disease dives into your skin? Yes, yes. No. All right, let me see if I can find that one then. Ah, there it is. All right. Forget chainsaw movies and hockey mask villains. If you want some real horror, take a look at this. A living, blood-sucking tick. This is what Europeans call a wood tick. It's a cousin of the deer tick, and they both spread Lyme disease. They're both about the size of a sesame seed. It has a mouth that looks like two saws on the side of a barbed sword. That sword is called a hypostome. Scientists who study Lyme disease wanted to find out how this tick, with that mouth, manages to both cut through the skin and then to hang on for the days that it takes to get a full blood meal. They took video of the ticks biting into the ears of hairless mice. Now, the mice were already dead. They were sacrificed for the experiment. What they saw was that once the tick picks its spot, it uses those saws to cut into the skin, moving back and forth, doing something that looks a little bit like the breaststroke. And that pushes the hypostome in and pulls the skin back over. Once the tick is solidly embedded in the skin, it doesn't have to expend any energy, so it can relax and drink its fill. There's no practical use for this knowledge yet, but it doesn't hurt to know your enemy. So, there'll be a walk in the woods after this. And then we'll play the Brad Paisley song that, I don't know if anybody knows that. No? I won't go into that. It's called I Want to Check You for Ticks. That's it. You Google it. So that is kind of, along with people talking about the importance of images and the importance of video, that's one of the pitches that I wanted to make, is that we're interested in research video. Now, what are our criteria for it? I mean, in a way, the more things change, the more they stay the same. We're looking for news. As I said, even though we'd like to run, somebody had some great naked mole rat video that they showed me, but it sent me, and I responded and said, this is terrific, but we've got to have a finding, when I do have a paper coming out soon. So we're looking for stuff that, where there's a result. So there's a clear bit of information, a clear finding. If it has some bigger implications, great. Of course, sometimes we can just say, well, it doesn't have any practical implication, but wasn't that cool to see a tick digging in? And we have to be able to tell it in a minute. So I think the value for communicating science in something like this is that you get to show the process of science a little bit. We use the actual, animations and things that researchers are doing, and a lot of the other science takes you get into some, more detailed scientific sort of reconstructions and things, and then from the point of view of what does well, I think it's it's what's always done well, kind of short. These are like little news nuggets that people have done forever. So short, clear, one point in the story, and you can make a little story out of it. So thank you very much. That's what I have to say.
Well, now that's a hard act to follow. It is interesting as we become more focused on visuals. Independent and hard-nosed and skeptical science journalists find themselves more in the position of collaborating with you all as we try to harvest your rich crop of pictures and images and tick videos. Now, there are few, I can't think of any publications out there that more embody and have given voice to this revolution in information technology and social networking, in the way that the internet has transformed our entire craft, but also the world we inhabit, than, of course, Wired magazine. And our next speaker, Brandon Keim, is a voice of Wired. He's written for them since 2007 as a blogger, as a reporter, as an editor who specializes in science, environment, and technology. And I'm hoping now that he's going to make sense of this for us and give us some sense of where we're actually headed. Brandon, please, come on up.
Well, after that excellent introduction and that marvelous tick video, I'm a little embarrassed to say I didn't actually come with any visual aids whatsoever. It wasn't for want of trying, actually. I wanted to find cute cat videos that would embody principles that I would be talking about today, and I spent a lot of time doing that, which was fun. I didn't actually find any. But if any of you are thinking of leaving public information and going into business, I really think that conference-specific cute animal videos would be golden. But the first principle I wanted to illustrate is just how hard it is to get a journalist's attention. And this was something I was thinking about last summer. I was having a conversation with a press officer from a major research institution. I should probably just not name names. And so this guy was doing a fantastic job because he actually was talking to me and he had my interest. And this is a difficult thing because journalists, just as Elizabeth was talking about, we get 1,000 press inquiries a month and they roll over us in a wave. And by and large, we just duck our heads down and try to avoid it, or at least that's what I do. And that's no disrespect whatsoever to what you're doing, which I think is a tremendously important and difficult job. It's just the dynamics of time in the day, and it's how I work. So this guy was talking to me, and I think he was talking about, it was some sort of cellular mechanism, basic research. And so it became apparent that the metric that he was using was covered. Actually, I'm sorry. Before I get into the metrics that he was using, I should say that there are times, maybe a couple times a month, where I do get a press release or a media inquiry, and the information does become relevant to me. And a couple times a year, it does become a story. And in light of that, I'm certainly glad to have them. I don't spam filter them. I do eventually, at least look at the taglines. And I think the advice that Elizabeth and David and James have given regarding those is really tremendous. And I would just add on to that the importance of building up a relationship with if you can, with a journalist in question. You know, don't blanket email people. I think that doesn't do anybody any good. But you know, if there's something that you genuinely think I would be interested in, or you know that I've covered in the past, reach out to me. Try to build up some sort of relationship. And then there's certainly much more chance it'll be of interest to me. There's much more chance I'll pay attention to it. And I wanted to give a shout out here to Joyce Peterson from the Jackson Lab in Bar Harbor, who I think does a fantastic job of this. And so anyways, getting back to this conversation I was having with the press guy, you know, so his metric, it became apparent in our conversation, was that, you know, he wanted to get coverage, he wanted to get pickup, and the success by which he was judged would be, you know, how many outlets carried a story, how much attention it got whatsoever. You know, and I thought, you know, this is kind of a shame, and it was a shame for two reasons. And the first is just that, you know, clearly the research he was talking about was important, and this isn't specific to, you know, cellular research or whatever he was working on. You know, it can be, you know, whatever it is that you guys are promoting. Very often they're specific to a particular group of people or interesting to a particular group of people, not to a general audience. And in a way, I think scientists are punished for that. You know, in talking to this man, was looking for something about the mechanism that was going to be intellectually compelling in and of itself, you know, kind of a narrative, a scientific mystery. You know, and that does a disservice to things that are important but not flashy or glamorous. And so there's that. That's one reason it was too bad that he was being judged on pickup. And the second is that, you know, I know how the sausage gets made, and I think, you know, there's so much coverage out there. I've been responsible for so much of this coverage, you know, where you've got 4 hours or 8 hours if you're lucky to do a story, or quite often even less than that. You know, you're pumping out 1 or 2 or 3 stories a day. And I'm not actually sure that we're well served by that model. I can't imagine what it's like to be a researcher and spend years working on something and then having somebody, you know, wrap it up in 3 hours and get things wrong. And wow, yeah, that would really suck. So getting back again to the press officer, let me check something. So the metric again is coverage and pickup, and I think that, you know, in a way that doesn't need to be the metric. And we live in a media ecosystem now where, you know, if I was trying to imagine or visualize the way that information was distributed 20 or 30 years ago, maybe it would be, you know, some sort of central information source, you know, the big dot in the middle, and then lots of little dots arrayed around that, and the information goes from one to all the little sources. And I don't think that's the environment we live in anymore. We live in an environment, you know, where there's just dots all over, and the journalist, you know, isn't necessarily, you know, the center of information distribution anymore. It's much more egalitarian than that. And so in a way, I don't need to be the center, or a journalist doesn't need to be the center of press information officer attention. And that doesn't mean that you should ignore me altogether. I wouldn't want that, and I don't think that would be good. But I think it's actually possible, or in principle at least, it seems reasonable to me that press officers might think about their role as being content providers themselves, or as facilitating the flow of information in a way that you build up your own audience. You reach the people to whom that information is going to be the most relevant, and that can include journalists, in the case of the man I was talking to, patients groups, other researchers, whatever it is that's germane to your topic. And, you know, certainly social media is a way that you can do that. Again, Elizabeth, great advice on how to build up that community and really think of it that way. You know, you're using social media not just to broadcast information, but to cultivate an audience and cultivate a community. And out of those interactions, general media coverage could emerge, and there will be times when general media coverage is something you go specifically to, but I don't think that is the fundamental purpose anymore. And so, as for what that actually means in tactical detail, it's easy for me to make grand pronouncements about how you should rethink the profession, and a lot more difficult to tell you how to do that. But I do think there's a couple things you can do, and, you know, again, just be involved in discussions, be a presence, and not even necessarily a presence that's always promoting your institution or promoting a particular body of research, but just be part of the community. And I think it builds up trust. I think it's more valuable to everybody. And also think about the fact that what you do, or the materials that you provide, I should say, are going to become source documents. And every day you can hop on Reddit and you'll see a press release that's been aggregated on Science Direct or EurekAlert or what have you. And it's that press release that's gone viral and is getting a gazillion hits and all this. And I think in light of that, it's really incumbent on the people producing those press releases or producing whatever materials it may be to think about what you're doing as a journalist would, because this is a source document. And that might mean making a few extra phone calls, doing some extra work, doing more background research, even consulting and trying to get independent perspectives on things, but really approach it as if that's going to be the statement of public record. And yeah, I didn't have any cat video to illustrate that, but if anybody would like to talk about this further, hit me up on Twitter. It's at @9Brandon. I think my email is in the material as well, and it's not hard to find anyways. So thanks a lot.
That was excellent, and I was listening there, and I was thinking, there's a built-in tension in what we're talking about here between sort of the best of traditional reporting, which of course is slow and marinates, and then the kind of instant fast forward of social media, which is broad and all-encompassing, but also very shallow and very superficial, and there's this underlying tension. Our next speaker, Corey Powell, it's hard for me to think of any single person who's had more influence on the shape and direction of magazine science journalism in the U.S. than Corey. He currently is editor-at-large at Discover and acting editor-in-chief of American Scientist, but he was at Discover for 13 years, and for a big chunk of that was their editor-in-chief. And then for 8 years or so before that was on the board of editors at Scientific American. What's particularly, I think, germane to our conversation here this morning is that while at those magazines, he was the launch editor for scientificamerican.com and for discoverymagazine.com. So I think that his perspective here is going to be particularly interesting. It's something I'm looking forward to hearing. Corey, you want to?
Thank you, Lee, and also thank you a lot to the previous speakers who did a lot to set up the things I want to talk about. As you may have gathered from Lee's gracious setup, I'm something of a straddler. I come from a long lead time, long form magazine journalism background. But then I was involved in the creation of the Scientific American website, the creation of the first modern Discover magazine website, and then I did a weird migration back to print, somehow not quite understanding where the media world was going, and ended up as the editor-in-chief of Discover for a period. And then I sort of went through another evolution, which I kind of want to talk about because it's relevant to where we are right now. So I left Discover Magazine as editor-in-chief about a year ago, actually back in January. And since then I've kind of gone on my own social media journey. I had always sort of relied on the staff and the web team to be the voice of the magazine, and suddenly I was kind of launching my own brand in addition. So I became active on Twitter. I started blogging. I started basically experiencing from the other side things that I've been encouraging other people to do, dealing with more of it directly, and getting more buried into this social media ecosystem. And so what I really want to talk about is think about these things at all different scales. And I think Brandon very nicely set that up. When I'm looking at a news release, when I'm looking at different sources, I'm thinking about, how am I going to tweet it? How can I blog it? Can this be a magazine column? Could this be a magazine feature? Could this be something where I involve the scientists directly to blog or to write a long form piece? And to be honest, I'm on Twitter, kind of collecting string for book ideas. So these things are operating at all scales. I think it's very helpful to know that on the one hand you want instantaneous impact. On the other hand, you're building up a knowledge base that people are going to use in all kinds of ways that are not always immediately visible. So the first thing I would say to all of you is, think fast and also think slow. Just remember all the different time scales in which these things are going to get used, and not all of them are going to be immediately evident to you. I say, the time scale of tweeting is an hour, but of course, in many cases, the time scale of tweeting is a minute. The time scale of blogging. I'm an old school writer. I need a day to write a story, but there are certainly people here who are fully capable of writing a blog post or a quick news story in an hour. So I have in my brain these different time scales. With weekly magazine journalism, with monthly magazine journalism, there are still these old hard cycles, just limited by the printing cycle and the publishing cycle. When I write in Discover or in Scientific American, or I just did a story for Popular Science, those are all, the fastest turnaround you're going to do is a month or two, because you just have to get things to the printer. If I'm sending a journalist out, or if I'm myself the journalist, I'm going to go and travel, you're talking about several months of lead time. And if I'm getting a scientist not to write a blog post, but actually to write a print feature, this is, pieces that I assign for American Scientist, it can easily be a 6-month lead time. So again, it's those oats can be a lot of different things. It can be Quaker instant 1-minute oatmeal. You can be making oatmeal cookies. The same ingredients end up in a lot of different places, and that's important to remember. And so. Again, kind of illustrating this in action. This was a story. It was a news report that came out from the Hubble Space Telescope back in July. I tweeted it out, and it was one of the most retweeted things that I'd ever posted. I ended up writing a column for Discover about it. It's a story that got picked up many different places, and I actually have an idea for a feature in the works. The headline itself was Hubble spots azure blue planet, which is, it's a sort of, it's a good little wonder story. It doesn't necessarily tell you a whole lot of what makes this so amazing. I look in the story, and I have a particular interest in astronomy. I look in the story, and there's a quote, and it's right up there in the first paragraph, and it says that this is a world where it rains glass sideways in howling 7,000 kilometer per hour winds. Well, I retweeted that, and even though it had metric, and not only metric, but metric in the non-American spelling of metric, and in spite of that, this thing went wild. There was just something so visceral about that image. And sure enough, the next day, I picked the headline that Mike Lemonick wrote in Time magazine and Time.com. But there were probably about 100 variants of this headline that turned up everywhere. A blue planet where it rains glass, and it's just such an instant and visceral kind of image. Now, the interesting thing to me is, if you dig down deeper into that story, there also, there was information about how they found the planet, how they measured the color of the planet, which actually did turn out to be very interesting. That's why the original PIO made sure to put the color in the headline, even though in the headline itself it wasn't obvious. How they found it, how they figured out the color, how they figured out the temperature. There's sort of a lot of interesting technique in the release, and that then I went back and sort of looked at that, thought about, okay, there's actually an interesting column. It doesn't build straight off this story, but it builds off some of the related research, and then pulling back even deeper. how do you figure out the colors of other worlds? What does it mean? What does it tell you about, is there life out there? Are there other Earths out there? What kinds of alien worlds are out there? And one of the great things with Twitter is that I use it to test headlines. I use it to see what gets a response. Sometimes I'll actually, I'll tweet out one of my own stories 2 or 3 different ways and see how it reacts. Partly it's just because people who are not using TweetDeck, people who are just sort of watching Twitter feed go by, often miss what you're saying. And you all know this. That sometimes you have to put a story out multiple times just to make sure that people actually, see what you're saying. But I also, I use headlines to see. I use it to sharpen my own writing. 140 characters is actually, if you're thinking about it as a headline and as a voice test, is actually a surprisingly large landscape. And I think, and you all can be doing the same thing. That a press release has to be honest, it has to be direct, it has to be communicative. A headline has to be all of those things, and Twitter is a way to test that. And then in Facebook, where you're doing longer posts, again, the same thing. Those are ways to test your leads, to sort of test different ways of expressing the same story. And I think a couple people made this point before. You're always walking a fine line. You want to get people's attention, but if anything sounds fake or canned or exaggerated, you will get nailed for it instantly. And so, there's a bigger upside and a bigger downside when you're working in social media. We heard a couple conversations about visuals before, and I'll just mention again, coming at this from my perspective, think about all these different scales. There are, tweeting out pictures is great because I'm always looking for visuals, and so I'm looking at just instant, things I can tweet or things to retweet. Blog posts, as we were, people have already talked about that blog posts or quick news stories need visuals. We heard about, Jim Gorman talked about videos. Slideshows, a lot of websites are doing slideshows and occasionally narrated slideshows, and those are incredible traffic drivers. They're often set up so that you have to spend a bunch of time forwarding from one to the next to make your website very sticky, because people like making things sticky. But people love visuals, and done right, the visuals can actually tell a lot of stories. I get called on from time to time to do science explainers on cable news, and one of the things they like to do now is they have their great news sets where there's the Jumbotron, there's some giant screen. They like to put you in front of a visual. If it's a story like this where it's the planet that rains glass, and look, here's a picture of the planet, and this is actually an interesting illustration because it's not just. It's not real. It is an illustration. It's an imagination of what the planet looks like, but it's based on. It's actually illustrating a number of things that we do know about the planet, of the color and some reasonable simulations of what kind of weather patterns you would see on a world like that. Newspapers, obviously, even the New York Times has color. These days, so there's, there really is, there is even in the actual physical medium, there's still a lot of places, there are more and more places for visuals. Magazines, obviously, still operate very much according to the old ecosystem. Although again, if you walk into a newsstand, although newsstands are getting a little harder to find than they used to be, but if you walk into a newsstand, you'll see, there's more and more of these standalone publications in the industry. They're called SIPs, or single issue publications. It's great minds of science. Great moments in history. Funniest cats we've ever seen. Again, these are often heavily visual anthologies. So again, when you're thinking about timescales, this is something, these kinds of visualizations. At Discover, I did a number of publications like this. I did a cosmology one, and I did a kind of a weird worlds one, and they fed heavily on these kinds of visuals. And again, you might not even know that you inspired that until months later. So, on the one hand, you're looking for instant feedback. On the other hand, you need to be aware that there is this kind of long tail of the things that you do. So some of these other things, I'll go through this a little bit more quickly because this overlaps with some of the things we've already heard. On obviously you needed a news hook. Obviously, you know, every release needs context. The personal element is incredibly important. Again, you know, when I look at a press release, I'm looking for is there an obvious source to talk to, and is this person going to be interesting and quotable? So, you know, I'm on the scale that I'm working at, I'm usually not using the quotes that are in the release, but the quotes in the release are telling me, first of all, you know, is this something I want to jump on instantly on Twitter? And then second of all, you know, is this person going to be an interesting source? So, you know, again, it's a very quick sales pitch where you're telling me whether or not, you know, I'm assuming if you're quoting somebody and you put in a good quote in there, that means that person has some energy, has some communication skills. So, you know, knowing who you're promoting is very important. And I actually can get back to that in a second. And then resources. I mean, video resources we heard about before, but for me, it's incredibly important. If there's a link to a primary paper, if there's a link to somewhere to go deeper, that means a lot to me. And, you know, maybe 99% of the people who are reading that release are never going to go there. But to the ones who are going to go deep, you know, having a link to, you know, to the preprint, as I mean, in this case, that there was a link directly to a preprint version of the paper explaining exactly what the research was on this planet. That made a huge difference to me. And, you know, that one little link, and it's a paper that was already up on the Los Alamos preprint archive. But the fact that I didn't have to hunt for it, and that I could, at a glance, I could see, you know, I saw who all the researchers were, and you know, and you know, which ones, you know, are you know, which ones were in Europe and had probably already gone to sleep, and which ones were here in America. You know, that was incredibly important in establishing the credibility and establishing the option for the reporter to go deeper. Obviously, I don't even need to explain this. You know, you want to go big, but you don't want to go too big. You know, you want to be very, very careful about what you're selling, because everybody who gets a lot of releases has an incredible allergy to oversold stories, and you know, when you do that, it doesn't just backfire on that story; it backfires on you as a news feed. And especially if I'm trying to decide, you know, I follow a lot of different labs and a lot of different PIOs on Twitter. If those feeds are clogged with self-promoting or with irrelevant stories, I just unfollow, and then you're invisible. So you have to be really careful about that. And then the more subtle kinds of errors that I see in how people communicate. You know, even when they're pushing things out in social media, it's not always obvious. You know, why this is a relevant story right now, why it's relevant at all, where the information comes from. You know, who's the lead investigator? Who's a person I should call up if I want more information? Where do I go if I want to get backgrounder on it? And one of the strangest things is getting embargoed stories where it's not clear when the embargo is, or getting embargoed stories where the embargo is 10 days from now, as if I'm going to hold on to that press release for 10 days and then think, today's the day I can finally use this press release. You know, I mean, I understand the need for embargoes, but you have to think from my side. When I'm being bombarded with information, the embargo needs to be very clear, and I want it to be very near term, because if it's a long horizon embargo, forget it. You know, my brain has gone somewhere else. So I'm going to start with close with two thoughts. One is just, again, reiterating a point that some of the other speakers have made, that you all not only are communicating to journalists, but increasingly you really are journalists. I mean, the public has much more access directly to your news feeds than ever before. There are lots and lots of sites that reprint press releases, sometimes in ways where it's not even obvious that they are the original press releases. And there are people who go directly to, intentionally go directly to press release sites, who are seeing things not just on EurekAlert, but on all these other places where you can basically, go into Newswise and things like that, where they can become primary news sources for a lot of people. So I think that's both a responsibility to the public, and it's a self-serving mechanism for communicating more clearly with the people who are covering this, who are covering the science, that if you are thinking about these things, on these different scales and at the same level of seriousness and depth and yet fun and relevance, that will make things much more effective. And another thing that I didn't put in, but I've been thinking about just over the past week. I was at a conference. So one of my connections with American scientists, I'm connected to the Sigma Xi Society, which publishes the magazine. They just had a conference about science communication and science journalism in the social media era, similar theme. And one big topic of conversation that we ended up getting into that really does not get talked about a lot here is that that you all are an incredible force for promoting diversity and for promoting younger researchers in this field. That when we all are looking at news stories, one of the first things we're looking for is who's the quotable person, who's the researcher who's doing this. Internally, within academic departments, younger scientists are often not particularly encouraged to be blogging and to be off on Twitter. Those are things that are not necessarily tangible benefits to them, within the academic department. But obviously, they're very important institutionally and they're very important culturally. And so, you all are you're the lever that can really push that. You're telling the reporters who you think are the really interesting people, and where there are younger researchers, and just by pushing younger researchers are, I think, it's a more diverse crew. They're voices that are not well represented out there, and reporters are dying to talk to people who are not the same source you've talked to 10 times before, and the same source who's been quoted 10 other places. So there's a ready market for that, and I think it's an incredibly important role that you all have, which I think is significantly underrepresented. So anyway, thank you all.
Now, we come to our bird watcher, who has been carefully observing us throughout this presentation. I'm talking about Robin Lloyd, who's down at the end of the table there, who is, I think, easily it's agreeable that she is, I think, the architect of the social media of science. She is the driving force in this area for a decade or more. She is currently the news editor of Scientific American, where she's responsible for editing and assigning and managing story flows. But in particular, she is the person responsible for the Scientific American homepage, and she oversees all of Scientific American's social media. And as you probably know, SciAm is especially active and experimental in this realm. But before that, she was a senior editor at livescience.com and at space.com, and she's served her time in the institutional world at the American Museum of Natural History. So she comes by these insights honestly, and I'm looking forward to hearing them. Robin, please join us.
Thank you, Lee, and I think we all now have our work cut out for us with these very generous introductions and kind introductions that Lee has given us. Thank you, everyone, for being here. I guess I'm queued up. We were kind of bragging a little bit at the panel before we started about how many times we've actually used PowerPoint. This is my second PowerPoint presentation ever. I think I hit the right hand button. No. Yeah, click maybe? No. Next, that might work. Yay.
Spacebar works.
Spacebar works too. Oh, yeah. So everyone has, as we keep saying, Jennifer Santisi did a great job sequencing us here, and each of our presentations is leading nicely into the next one. And Corey indeed directly stated one of my main messages to you, which is to think like a journalist and to recognize that most of you know, you're content providers, we're content providers. We don't all love the word content and the idea that we're providers of content. We want to be storytellers, I think, really in our hearts, all of us in this room. And we love science stories, and we also like interrogating and questioning scientific findings and science stories. But, you know, the storytelling is the driver there for all of us. So a lot of times I like to talk about our shared goals and the places where they also are not shared and are at odds with each other. But yeah, there's a mission that we have in common, and that's really, you know, journalism and getting information out there in an accurate, exciting and important and policy-informing way. At least that's a lot of how I think of what I've been doing over the years. It changes from outlet to outlet, obviously. So, you know, just to reiterate what our daily diet is, I'm a news editor, so basically I run online newsrooms. That's what I do, but I've been doing it in different ways at a bunch of different places. So how my diet looks now is the read-in the morning, which is super important, and it feels like it's falling away a little bit, that people aren't doing their read-ins anymore and just sort of like reading in throughout the day. But I think that the morning read-in is actually really important because that's when the day's agenda gets set. It'll change in an hour, it'll change in 2 hours, it'll change in a minute. But it's important, I think, to start the day knowing what the agenda is. The New York Times has this awesome new column that Andy Newman curates called New York Today, I think. And I love reading at the beginning of the day, especially because I live in New York, and just tells you what the temperature is, if there's off, you know, if you have to pay the meter that day, but it also tells you, you know, what the big news events will be, what some nice cultural events of the day will be, and what some of the headlines are, not just from the Times, but elsewhere. And that's what we're all doing, is sort of helping our reader get set for the day. So when I read in, I listen to NPR in one room, you know, news radio in another room, I read the Times, and I read Twitter, which has become basically another major newspaper for me. It is now a major newspaper for me to read in on Twitter. Facebook, I read in a little bit too, because there are trends there, and I've started to curate my feed a little bit on Facebook now, so I see what non-journalists are thinking about and talking about, and it may be a cat video, but I need to know about that cat video. It may be something we need to cover or explain on a blog post at Scientific American. So, you know, in Washington, you know, of course, the Post, and depending on where you are and what audience you're facing, as the new lingo goes, you may have other sources that you use for your read-in. So my read-in takes like 2 hours, and it starts the minute I get up to the minute, you know, so that's like 6:30 or 7, and then it goes until 10 o'clock when I finally make it from the Bronx to the office in Lower Manhattan. So I, as the person basically running our online news operation, or at least the daily component of it, I have 70 stories in my head now. And then I'll have a slightly shifted 70 stories in my head in an hour and 2 hours and 3 hours. And that's kind of my job, is to know what's in the works and about to go live and going to go live in a week on our site. So that's part of what you're competing with for me. And I'm sure that you guys also have about 70 projects that you're working on right now, and you're going to try, by goodness, to do a good job on 2 of them today, if you're lucky. There's also stories in the magazine, and I do a lot of liaising, if you'll pardon that verb, with the Prince magazine, which is our bread and butter. We're not supporting ourselves with a website. So I'm talking too long. So there's magazine stories I'm keeping in my head. There's 5 to 10 stories on our blog network that go live every day, and I need to be aware of those and see which of those need to be elevated and which are super newsy and which, you know, should be immediately tweeted and which can go out later. We automate our Twitter feed. We have like 600,000 followers, which is pretty good, but it's nothing near what some of my colleagues here are managing, and some of you as well. But it's a major traffic driver. Twitter, this is an insight I just got recently at a seminar I went to. A lot of people, like whatever, 90% of Americans are not on Twitter, right? 60% of people who, I forget exactly the figure, who start a Twitter account never use it again or never send a tweet. But the people who are on it, first of all, a lot of science writers are on it, so it's a really great place to develop relationships and see what's going on in our field. So don't let anyone dismiss Twitter for you for that reason. For our profession and our goal here as science communicators, it's massively important. It doesn't matter that we're talking to one another. This is our field. And we are drawing in other people. A lot of our interested audience is there. So Twitter is where our super interested audience is. It's where our loyal audience resides. It's a fraction of our audience, but it's a very important part of our audience. They're the influencers, they're the deciders, they're the policymakers or the policy questioners, the agenda setters. So keep that in mind with your tweets. Facebook are not your loyal readers, but they'll generate a lot of page views. So if that's your goal, that's good. For several years in online media, we've been encouraged to get a lot of traffic and have the most traffic and beat the other guy's traffic figures and get to at least 10 million monthly uniques, or get to 1 million monthly uniques, or get to 70 million monthly uniques, David. So, or daily. There's no way I'll catch up to David's outlet. But it sets an interesting standard. But what I'm hearing in the last year is that, first of all, we have no business model for online. We know this. Still don't have a business model. Are we going to get one? I'm not holding my breath. There are several business models out there, but there's not a unique one like there has been for print media for a long time that's sustainable and scalable. So the goal, it seems, from a business perspective, is now to get those loyal readers, those returning readers, and the people who are super interested in your audience. So on Facebook, it's good to be out there. We get a lot of page views and visits from them. They never come back. If you want your loyal readers, pay attention to Twitter. So I'm reading thousands of tweets every day. Don't worry that you can't read your whole feed. Don't get distracted by people who dismiss Twitter for that reason, too. It's just a pool. You dive in, you dive out. When you can't dive in, get your work done. But when you can, it's really worth visiting. That's part of why we automate our feed. I do some personalizing of it and some retweeting and stuff, but we have so many stories go live every day that I would have to hire a staffer to manually send all our tweets. If you have someone who you can manually send your tweets, good for you. And I know WNYC does that in New York, and it's a lovely feed. But it takes staff power, and it can take time to do it right. I have people who could do it, but they make typos. So, there's a lot of issues. You cannot have typos or syntax or grammar errors if you're going to be an authoritative outlet. Scientific American is a very authoritative outlet. A lot of you represent authoritative outlets. Of course, my colleagues represent very authoritative outlets. It's pretty important, as others have stated, what you tweet and what's in your tweets. RSS, I read RSS on my smartphone. That's another way. But I don't read RSS as much as I did a few years ago. That's kind of going out because of other channels becoming more dominant, and RSS readers are come and then they go. Thank you, Google. So, I would say I consume about 60% of my diet at a laptop, and 40% of my online diet on a mobile device. I just use smartphones. I'm not an iPad person, and I read print stuff too. Sometimes that's the best way to read stuff, and I pay print subscriptions and radio subscriptions because I believe in supporting media. Next, cripes. I'm a big NASW person, National Association of Science Writers. I've been on the board. I've been going for more than 10 years. NASW is where I learned how to do what I do. And the nice thing about NASW, and we have Lee Hotz to thank for this in part, is that it's an inclusive organization for public information officers, science writers of both the journalism stripe and not technically journalism stripe. I encourage you to come there because I am a big relationships person. I like to develop relationships with my sources, relationships with PIOs. These are professional relationships where I can talk to you like a human being, and we're not necessarily allergic to each other. I am allergic to certain kinds of public information approaches and publicity pitches, and I have been paid to be that person, and I tried really hard not to be the annoying kind of person that can be, as we all know. So our aim in National Association of Science Writers in our Constitution is to foster the dissemination of accurate information regarding science and technology in keeping with the highest standards of journalism. And I hope that's how most of us in here orient toward the science writing and communicating and outreach that we do, keeping in mind the highest standards of journalism. And I think that when we do that, we're more effective, and you're more likely to be read and interacted with by journalists and other science writers. So thinking like a journalist, what does that look like? Develop relationships, as I said. I think that, that meet space, real time, face-to-face, in real life interaction that happens at NASW, which extends usually for about 4 or 5 days, and I usually stay to the bitter end and go on the field trips too for the Council for the Advancement of Science Writing sessions that are usually now back-to-back, really the same setting, same conference center. And that's where a lot of relationships are developed and fostered, and I see people and I ask them what they're working on. And we joke about lolcats. It's great. We can also develop relationships on Twitter. So some PIOs, I don't actually follow a lot of PIOs and public information outlets on Twitter. I don't follow people by virtue of what they do or their job title. I follow them by virtue of what they offer me and the information they can give me. I don't really care where they work. So some of my most valuable tweeters that I follow are PIOs. Some are like just institutions. Some are like former contributing editors to Scientific American who freelance. Black Physicists is a great Twitter feed if you're really into physics. There's just a lot of really great feeds out there, and so find them and unfollow the ones that aren't valuable. Don't waste your time. It's so easy to waste time on Twitter. It's not a popularity contest. Nobody's going to be hurt. I don't even look at who unfollows. Who cares who unfollows me? Tailor your pitches to us. I'll show you some examples of that in the next couple slides. Short introductions help me in a pitch rather than long introductions or long, winding introductions. Being a journalist involves, cutting to the chase, the elevator pitch. It involves being honest, of course. We all know this. Attending conferences, especially where you're going to bump into... I'm an ex-scientist, sociologist, if you believe that's a science, it's not. I'm an ex-sociologist, academic. I was a PIO for a while, then I was a journalist. I've been a dishwasher. I've done a lot of things. I worked on an assembly line. Please, the phone is out. Nobody wants to receive a phone call ever. Anymore. Emails, I get a couple hundred a day, and if they're clearly press releases and they start media advisory, I'm sorry, off the record, I delete every single one of them because I don't want to be influenced by them. I want to be more curated. I would say about 1% of them I read, but we're a very writer and reporter-driven outlet, and I'm a very relationship-driven person, professional relationships, and so that's how I want to get. I want to get my information by way of journalism, by way of reporting, by way of looking at the data in front of me, by way of being a sociologist and a birder. I'm really not that great a birder. Provide sources, multimedia. Everybody's really stated the importance of that. I won't reiterate. Save us time. We're all rushing. We went through that. Prove your value. That comes over time. If I've worked with you once, I'm more likely to work with you again. It just works that way. That's relationship-driven. Tweet smart and maybe with a separate presence. Some of my favorite PIOs have their NCAR, National Climate and Atmospheric Research account, and then they have their personal account. And they will have in there, I in no way represent NCAR when I tweet from this. But I'm just using NCAR as an example. I'm not even sure of a person that does this from NCAR. But I like that. I like when I can see, like, Mars rover driver tweeting and see what they're thinking about. It gives me ideas, and it gives me a sense of the person behind the tweeter. Here's some press releases. We'll just go through these quickly. Solid but impersonal. I just wrote, this came out of Cornell. They do really good press releases, but Ivy League University press release. Look at those graphs. They're nice and short. There's video right in the third graph. There's a quote. People like to read quotes. One of my early editors taught me, even if it's just because it's between quote marks. So I'm more likely to read that. It's impersonal. Not so great. That's the one drawback of that one. Too dense. Wow, who can look at that? Is painful to look at. talk about going to the margins. No. Margins, dense, tone deaf. Newtown just happened. People are terrified. Shut up. That was rough. Too short. Please see the link below. Do not make me load another link unless I'm highly motivated to look at a picture or a video that's going to help me get my job done. Don't just, that's lazy. Sorry. I tried to take the names off. This is lovely. Okay, it's my former institution. I'm so biased. I have rules. I can never write about the Natural History Museum again, only as a individual blogger. So I have to have rules for myself because I'm one of those hybrid people. But anyway, this came out of the Hayden Planetarium, which is part of the museum. And, we're opening. That's a little more conversational. I think this is the entire email I got from a woman I've worked with a lot there since I left the museum. I'm not covering this. I can't even forward this around to my staff because that would be promotional from a place that used to pay me to do promotion for them. But it was information for me, and I was happy to receive it. I have a relationship with them. Some people were asking, one of the questions we get asked is, where do you go to read science blogs? This is a really cool site. It's hard to read, scienceseeker.org. And it's a project of science online. I happen to know NASW gave them seed money to get off the ground. It's like Technorati for science blogs. It's curated. It's an aggregator of science blogs. There's editors' picks. There's rating. There's commenting. There's different categories of posts, whether they have citations in them or not. It's really valuable. It's valuable for PIOs. It's valuable for science writers and communicators who are doing outreach, and it's valuable for science journalists. I recommend it. There's not a lot of places that, I don't know if there's anything that competes with Science Seeker now. Okay, we're on multiple platforms, just like everybody here, and we're always thinking about, where should this story appear? Should it appear on our iPad app? Should it appear in the magazine? Should it appear on our blog network? Or on our staff-written blog or a non-staff-written blog? Should it appear on the website as news? Should it be a slideshow? Should it be a video? So we're always thinking about that, and we also have multiple platforms for social media. We have our Twitter feed. We have Facebook. I manage these. I don't always execute the strategies, but I delegate and oversee. We have a Google Plus presence. We have a YouTube presence. Our YouTube presence is low, but we're trying to grow it. Anyway, our Google Plus following is kind of nice right now. It's around 300,000. It got high because we were approached by Google. Thank you. We collaborate with them in various ways. We were involved in their science fair with a prize that they give out to high school students. But the G Plus thing has been kind of fun because, and that's what I'll spend my last few minutes telling you about here, because they helped us learn the technology. The platform's not great. It's nowhere near email or instant messaging in terms of ease of use. But I was at a breakfast at Google's headquarters in Chelsea in Manhattan recently. Sounds to me like they want Hangouts to take over the telephone, to take over messaging, to take over email, everything. They're trying to integrate everything into it. What is Google Plus Hangouts? I'm talking about Google Plus and then the Hangout. I'm really focusing on Hangouts here. So we have a Google Plus page for our magazine, and then on that there's this software called a Hangout where you can basically have face-to-face interactions with up to 10 people, and anybody can watch the live stream and watch the archive of the discussion afterward. And it's archived on YouTube because Google owns YouTube. So we got tech support and encouragement and source help, help finding celebrities or people to talk with us for, guided conversations on G Plus Hangouts. You can have a Hangout that's just like a few people, but then you can also make it public. It's called a Hangout on Air. And that's like basically doing a little TV show. We did one recently with Edward O. Wilson, the myrmecologist, is that the word? Yeah, myrmecologist, the ant guy, and the biodiversity guy. one of the best known scientists out there. We thought it would blow up, like a lot of people watch now. We're in a small world. But we're going to try to get more viewers. You know, you have to go really big with Hangouts to get a lot of people. You know, you have to have big celebrities, very well-known people. That doesn't mean it's not worth doing an Edward O. Wilson Hangout. So anyway, Wilson loved it because he's so used to having to trot all over the world and sit in front of a camera and get lit and mic'd and 2 cameras and the hair light and the, With a G+ Hangout, we sent a tech support person to his residential community center and set up the webcam for him and stuck him in front of a laptop, mic'd him, and he just had to sit there and talk about what he loves to talk about, his latest book on science, technology, and engineering education for like 45 minutes. He loved it. I mean, he's a born communicator. Not everyone will love it, but it's a really nice platform for getting your people's voices out there. The trick is to promote it and keep the traffic on your page. So we've learned over time how to do that. I can tell you about that offline or afterwards if you'd like, but and I'm running out of time, but you do have to promote the heck out of it to get anybody to go to it. So you promote it on G+, you promote it on Facebook, you promote it on Twitter. We use the lead graphic for our page is our latest issue. We're a little behind here. This is our September issue, but here's some of the Hangouts we've done. We did one recently with Temple Grandin. Again, I thought that would be super popular. No, it's really just us who loves her. So, but, you know, she was really interesting and provocative, and we had her co-author. We do a lot of book Hangouts, so people love to talk about the books they just wrote, and why not? They're experts. They've been studying this thing for a couple, 10 years, somewhere in there, maybe 30. And those are very dynamic conversations that we have online. We also did the E.O. Wilson. We did sometimes we do them to promote like our special topic issue on food science that came out in September. So we had a conversation with one of our authors about genetically modified foods. So you can pick a hot button topic, and that actually had a lot of engagement in it. It did not drive a lot of page views, but it was very engaging for the people who really care about this stuff and are really talking about it. And a slideshow. I thought I had another thing to show you. So I guess what I wanted to, I don't have a visual for it, but one of the slideshows, one of the Google Plus Hangouts on air that we did was the result of a survey we did of our editors. So we surveyed our editors informally via email and just said, what books are you reading? And we combined that with some other recommendations. We do monthly recommendations in the magazine as well, and we have a partnership with Farrar, Straus & Giroux. And so we just basically called all those together. Then we did a poll of our readers, and we got like, I don't know, 6,000 respondents. It's not a scientific result, but to get 6,000 people to tell us which of the 40 books we put out as possible great summer science reading books to look into, to answer that poll and vote was pretty cool. And then we had a G+ Hangout with the 3 winners, and they were so excited to talk about their books and to meet one another and see the connections between their books. There's different ways, so you can see that we were able to draw a lot of social media components together to get our message out there, to get our brand out there, and to remain authoritative and honest and journalistic in our approach. So we engage with our audience that way. Thanks.
That was just delicious. Now, we've been talking at you for quite a while now, and I hope you found it at least partially as interesting as I have. But what we'd like to do now is turn it into an conversation. And I hope you have been sparked by what you've heard here. An awful lot of material has been flying over the transom here. And I've been scribbling some of it down, but I couldn't quite keep up. But I was prompted with a lot of questions myself. So I think the way this works, there are 2 microphones floating in the room. If you can get the attention of one of those microphones, which by some strange coincidence is actually held by a human being, we'd like to get this conversation going because I think you've got a lot of concerns that maybe we can answer, and you've got some things that we could probably learn from. Now, I just want to take my privilege here and just sort of start with a kind of straightforward one. There's a huge botanical garden of social media techniques and programs and marketing scams and things. And I'm just curious now, most of the conversation this morning has revolved around just three, until the very last minute there when we heard about Google+. But Twitter, Facebook, and Reddit. Now, there are another 15 or 20 and God knows what. I mean, are those the three? I mean, can I just go down the line here? Which is the one that you pay most attention to? Elizabeth?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I would say for me, Twitter is absolutely number one. As I think Robin said, I read it as my newspaper in the morning. And what I was talking about with Twitter lists, I have just, maybe 50 different publications and, what are their latest tweets in the last few hours. That is really a curated science news source for me. There are other outlets such as Pinterest that people are very attracted to. I'm not really familiar with it very much. LinkedIn for me is really about my professional career, and I don't really communicate with people on it, but I can use it to see, who is this person, what have they done in their professional past. So that's what comes to mind.
David, same question? Just quick.
Yeah, I would say Twitter is clearly the one that we pay attention to. Some of the other verticals that have in-post use Pinterest, we don't really do it. I think there are some sites that use it to pin beautiful, say, space photos. We've recently started using Instagram, which is a great place to put up really dramatic images, or say if we go out, if our staff go out into some event or meeting or interact with some scientists or, in the field or in their lab, put up a fun picture to kind of give some personality to our site. There aren't links back from Instagram, so we don't get traffic from Instagram, but it is a good brand building tool, possibly. We'll see.
Jim, now I know you've cornered the market on tick videos, but is there a particular tool there, a particular channel that you're looking for?
I do look at Twitter, but mostly I'm looking at specific journals that and what they have coming up. So I either find them on EurekAlert or go to the specific sites to look for what's coming up in the journals.
Brandon?
Of the social media platforms, the one that I do use most is Twitter, but I think I'm more like Jim here. I don't use it a great deal to come up with story ideas. I can easily, go days or a week without really diving in. When the interactions that I have on Twitter are more about conversations and, responding to people who are talking to me and what have you. But I look at a lot of RSS feeds. I still use the reader and a ton of journal articles.
Corey?
Yeah, I think maybe because of that was a relative latecomer to Twitter. I use it a lot. I use it as a primary news reader, just because I found even the blogs that I was following and the press release sources I was following, they start to become overwhelming. And the great thing about Twitter is the level of how much you can customize it. You can make it as narrow or as broad as you want to be. So in terms of what's coming in, that's certainly far more important to me than Facebook or the other feeds. In terms of what's pushing out, we use RSS. We still have some Reddit and Stumbled Upon used to be important for us. Slashdot used to be important for us. These things over time they ebb and flow. But obviously, Reddit still has a big influence. I use it for pushing out rather than for pulling in. And I've had the same experience what Robin was describing. YouTube is a really it's an interesting place to be, but it's very hard to crack. You're competing with the cat on the swing, and you're competing with Katy Perry. And it's no matter how good your science is, it's tough.
Now, Robin, you did such a good job of giving us the daily diet. I want to just vary the question a little bit. So given that we all seem so unanimously interested in and embedded in Twitter, is that a sign now that Twitter is peaked? What's the next thing?
I really like Pulse, and some people use Flipbook instead. So I don't know if it's the next big thing, but Brandon's right. RSS is still really valuable. But the way that I like to use RSS now is an app called Pulse, and an alternative to that is Flipbook. Flipbook is a little better known. Whether these will survive or not, I think Flipbook has major backing, but I actually like the interface of Pulse a little bit more. But I can fly through, in a really visually attractive way, a lot of RSSs at once. Now, my needs are a little different from everyone else here. Maybe they're, well, I don't know, everybody's needs are different. But I'm not reporting as much now as I'm monitoring dialogue and looking for trends and, to a certain extent, seeing what other outlets are doing. Not so much to compete with them, really, just to see what else is going on, because we're all kind of contributing to so many different things nowadays, and we're not all writing the same story. So I would put in a plug for those really nice apps that work on mobile devices for reading your RSS feed in a very visually appealing and rapid way that is nicer than some of the readers I used to use more frequently. But what's the one that we all shift to? Feedly is a very good RSS feeder reader too now that a lot of us who were using Google Reader flipped over to, and I like Feedly a lot. I think it's feed.ly, and when I have time to read that, it's very helpful.
Super, thank you. We have a question in the back there.
Can you hear me? Hi.
Yes.
Ethan Alpern of the United States Geological Survey, but given the subject matter, I'll introduce myself as @EJ Alpern of @USGS. So my question is, do you recommend having a personal Twitter account and a professional Twitter account, or do you think it's best to engage your readers with one and show them your whole self?
Interesting. I suppose part of the answer would be your institutional policy as to what you're allowed to get away with in the snarky department. But Brandon, what do you think?
I think that's something that would have to be decided on a case-by-case basis. I do think that institutional accounts are much more interesting when they're clearly the work of a human being. And I was having this discussion recently with somebody who works for the National Park Service in New York and Jamaica Bay, and she was having a great difficulty in that she had so much to say, but she was restricted by her institution from saying any of it. And so I don't know if that answers the question. I guess both if you have to, but just the institutional if you can, and be a human.
David, do you have a view on that?
Well, I was trying to figure out if there's a way to kind of A/B test some of your tweets with different accounts, different approaches. I don't know if that would really work very effectively given the size differential between personal and institutional Twitter accounts. But yeah, to me, I agree with that if you can be a person in your Twitter feed, that's what I'm saying. Try to be a person of presence. Don't sound like a robot, an institution. If you can add some humanity to your tweets and some fun, that goes a long way. So I guess.
Yes, Elizabeth.
So, I mean, as somebody who does have a separate institutional account and a separate personal account, I think it is important to distinguish the two because, A, you can build relationships with journalists with your own name, with your personal account, and B, I think professionally, if you switch from one institution to another, you can carry your Twitter handle if it's just your name. So, thinking long-term like that, I think it would be a good strategic decision, assuming your institution allows it.
Yeah, that's good advice. So, you, sir.
Doug Dollimore, senior science writer at the American Chemical Society. My question is more along the lines of how do we get the message to you these days? Is the narrative press release still the best way to go? Or would something along the lines that I've seen around, like more of a news advisory with bullet points, be more effective in the time constraints that you have? And the second part of the question I have is some of the alternative ways we might get to you, and how far away are we from the day when journalists will say, for God's sakes, no phone calls, no emails?
Oh, I think for some of us, we're already there. And please, really, 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 please, no phone calls to ask me if I got your email. You laugh.
May I send you an email?
Yeah.
I get that occasionally.
I'm sorry. So, Corey, you want to answer that question?
Sure. Let me think. I mean, Robin showed a good example of, the kind of like, the classic slightly impersonal but very effective press release. And I have to say that kind of press release still works very well for me. Where there's, it's a sharp, thoughtful headline. There's a 1 or 2 sentence, lead that explains the story. There's an immediate quote. There's an immediate pointer to, deeper reference or video or images. And then, below that, you have some space to do a deeper backgrounder, because anybody who's interested, who's reading that far, you've got them, and you can give a little more information. So I think again, just sort of understanding the hierarchy of the journalist's thought process. I mean, we might not be seeing that in the email. We might be you might be tweeting it out, and then we're seeing it, we're going deeper there. But in a sense, that's still the same thing. The tweet is kind of doing the beginning of the traditional press release, and then once you've got the person's interest, then there's that kind of like staggered hierarchy. I think the question of how you get their attention in the first place. Obviously, when we stopped taking phone calls, people were pushing email. Now we're getting overloaded with email, and so I think the advantage is, as we're looking in more tailored ways, we're looking at RSS feeds, or we're looking at Twitter, we're looking at the things that are interesting to us. I mean, the good news for you is, if we're looking at your feed, we're already interested. And so it's, there's a little bit of a kind of a narrow casting thing going on here. But again, I'd say, whatever you're feeding out, again, and back to this question of, sort of like the personal versus professional, it's good to have voice, and it's good to be direct, but you just have to be really rigorous. That there's no there's no sort of like corporate memo type things creeping into the feed or things like that. Because again, once I see junk coming into a feed, or irrelevant things, or things that are badly written or confusing, or just don't sound right, I unfollow. And at that point, all the hard work that you've done, or I delete you from my feed. All that hard work that you've done making yourself visible is over like that.
Jim, how do I get your attention in that question? How do I get to you?
Well, I look almost for quick or for news stories. I look almost exclusively at what's coming up in journals. So it has to be a new finding that's going to be published in a significant journal. So I do, glance at the headlines of news releases before I, delete them. But and if it's a very clear, specific finding that sounds really new, then I pay attention to it. I, more often go to the RSS feeds for journals that I know about. The only other instance is if there's a specific story that I'm covering. For instance, I was writing that's outside of the sort of discoveries. I was writing about experimentation on chimpanzees. So then I would sometimes get, develop a relationship with a public information officer, or talk to, for one, in these cases they were more activist organizations, but in some cases they were places where research was going on chimpanzees. And then I would get, more personal emails about new developments. So the other thing is, when there's something specific I'm working on, like when I was working on the Scientist at Work blog, I would reach out to PIOs to find out if they had scientists who were going, excuse me, to interesting places where we could plan in advance. So that was a long roundabout way of not answering the question, I guess.
Do we have a question here in the middle?
Thank you. I'm John Verico. I'm with the Department of Homeland Security Science and Technology Directorate. That's at DHS SCITECH, DHS SciTech. So what we're hearing here is how difficult it is to get your attention in a lot of different ways. And so a lot of it sounds like you kind of have to find us because you're not taking our phone calls and you're deleting our press releases and our media advisories. But when we do finally get the attention of reporters, and sometimes they're not the science writers, and unfortunately the science writer community has gotten smaller and smaller over the years, as a lot of publications have cut back on their specialized reporters, and they're going more to general assignment. So while we're trying desperately to reach you smart, intelligent people who can translate science to your readers, we're winding up getting only the attention of the general assignment reporters who don't get it and a lot of times get things wrong. That's offering us quite a challenge in getting our scientists to be willing to speak to reporters, because they're now kind of bashing their heads against the general assignment reporter who's not getting it right. So how can we help us to help you get the story from the scientist? How can we help distinguish your stuff from the flack that they're seeing coming out of a lot of the interviews they wind up doing?
Let me just reference something that Robin talked about in her presentation, which is, you know, there are two things going on here, it seems to me. One is, are you trying to reach a reporter that you know and trust and that you have developed a relationship and whose accuracy and credibility you believe that you can rely on? Or are you simply trying to target an institution? If you're trying to target an institution, you know, the Wallstreet Journal or the New York Times or wherever, I mean, you're at the mercy of whoever does answer the phone. But that's a separate problem. It would seem to me that one of the answers to your question is that you need to develop relationships with reporters. They're still out there. Many of them are now freelancers. But they still write for these institutions, and be guided by your sense of those relationships. Jim, you look like you were leaning forward there eagerly.
Yeah, I have a suggestion, which is I was teaching a course in science writing, and one of the things I did was bring in a scientist who I'd written a story about her work, and she was mostly satisfied with it, but had some points where she wasn't, and we discussed the process from her end and my end, what it was like. And one of the things she wished for was that she had been better trained and prepared by her public information officer on how to deal particularly with the flood of general assignment reporters who were talking. Although in some sense it wasn't really a flood, there were a lot of general assignment stories, but many of them were written, well, people did call, but they had read a news story. They'd never read the original paper or anything like that. But anyway, the point I was getting was she wished she had been better trained. And I think that when you have a story that you think might get attention, or if you have people who are likely to get attention or that you're pushing for, to train them who they're speaking to and what they need to do. You know, they need to have a couple very clear points. They need, all the things, you know, that they don't, that they have to talk as if they were talking to somebody, you know, in their family they're telling about their work. I mean, I could go on and on, but they need to be trained. And one good thing is for them to develop their own metaphors that are right, so you don't get the wrong ones. So I think the thing is, face it, you're going to have to deal with the general assignment reporters because that's the way the world is now, and train the scientists in how to talk to them.
Elizabeth, do you have a thought on that?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I was just thinking, you know, the way that I approach sources sometimes is to sort of look at what studies they've written in the past. And I guess if I were looking for journalists, I would see what stories they've written in the past. And so I would sort of, you know, Google, you know, if you're trying to target specific news outlets, I would, let's say it's an evolution story, I would Google evolution CNN, and I think my name would come up, and you know, different names would come up depending on the publications that you're looking at. But you know, if somebody's written 10 news stories about evolution, they're probably a good person at that organization to target.
Corey.
Yeah, just one small thought to that, which is, I think part of the question is, what is your metric of a successful press release? If what you're looking for is the largest number of people who mention this researcher in this press release, you're going to inevitably get a lot of low quality reporting. If you're focusing on a smaller number of high quality reporters who have large audiences, who ideally you have some relationship with, you have much more control over the story. And so I think that's another thing to think about is really, what is your goal with that press release?
We have back here.
Hi, Angela Herring from Northeastern University. I'm the science writer there, and I'm learning more and more that I need to be a science storyteller across multimedia, and I have no training in multimedia. But my question, I think, is for James. You were talking about your science take and all that. Do you want, and I also feel like this is a question for the audience, do you want these science videos, research stuff, do you want that like branded, or do you want just quick, 10-second things that you can then use in your own branding? Or would any of you repurpose our branded material with the scientists talking about the research and then some cool, video snips? And then my other question for the audience, and maybe we can talk about this on Twitter, is how do we get our scientists to understand that that kind of multimedia that they're already doing is actually valuable to us? And they might not really want to tailor what they're doing to us, so how can we take what they're doing and make it work for our needs? I don't know if that makes sense, but there you go.
Yeah, so take a crack at the first half, yeah.
Sure, on the branded question, I think that's a good way for you to reach a wider audience directly. I mean, one thing we haven't talked here, or you mentioned it a little bit, Brandon, is bypassing us completely, right, and using YouTube and any number of outlets to get your message out directly. I mean, many scientists now write their own blogs. You can put out these branded videos with the scientists talking about it that can be very successful. So it's not necessary to even get our attention, although you may get our attention with that. For our purposes, we would not use the branded one. We would ask for the original research video. And again, we wouldn't, we're not interested in the scientists talking about their research or in necessarily having the story already told. We're looking for the actual video that was done during research, even if it wasn't published with the finding, and then we can, tell the story. But there are there's two ways, and in terms of how you're going to convince the scientists to do it.
Brandon, you're looking thoughtful there. What?
Well, just a minor addendum to that would be at Wired, we don't mind running video that's branded so much, but just a little thing that you can do would be just put the branding at the end of the video instead of the beginning, because there's nothing more annoying than pressing play and having the university's logo pop up before you've seen anything. But yeah, just also to reiterate, we don't need to be your center of attention all the time. If what you are putting out there is interesting and you're sort of moving in the same circles that we are, we'll intersect at some point. But don't think about us as being the center of that.
Yeah, no, that's really true. And branding, video, we would be happy to use your video. We would not be happy to run your ad, but we would be scrupulous about sourcing that video so that it was prominently clear where it came from, who it was, So it may seem like it's splitting a hair. I think it adds up to the same thing, but it's an important difference. And I would throw my oar in with Jim. We would very, very, very much like to see process video, not talking head video. Here, right there, yeah, please.
I'm Laura Otto. I'm from the George Washington University School of Medicine and Health Sciences. My question is really how you evaluate the success of your social media, because I know a lot of you have personal and professional ones. And is it just to get the stories out there, or is it to actually create engagement and get people to respond and favorite and create a conversation? Like, do you guys have long-term strategic goals, or is it just putting out your information and hoping people follow you?
Yes. David, you want to start with that? And then Elizabeth?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, the goal is to get, I'm evaluated to some extent on traffic to the page, right? So I want to know, I want to get people to come to Huffington Post and to the science section, and so that's the ultimate metric there. So I think that, and I'll say every day, every hour I get a report that tells me what tweets are working, and every day I get the top tweets of the day that's emailed to every one of the staff. So we see and we learn. There's a constant honing process. Oh, I see why that one worked, or I think I know why that one worked. So we're very attuned to feedback from metrics on what's working. But ultimately, it's about getting traffic to the page.
Yeah, Elizabeth, and then Robin.
I guess for us, while traffic is very important, engagement is also very important, and I get really excited when a week after I've published a story, people are talking about it on Twitter. I think that is sort of a new metric of success, how much legs does a story really have, and that social media can really can push it way beyond that initial day. And if it can be pushed off the initial day, then that might be a reason to do a follow-up story. And if people are saying really valuable things about it on Twitter, they might become sources for your next story. So I think engagement is really important too.
Yeah, the term of art for what you're asking, of course, is ROI, return on investment. And I think a lot of us get caught up in trying to find the best metric for that. And it feels very elusive. Even when you come up with, you think is a great ROI indicator, when you add up, you're like, we didn't get much out of that. I wouldn't worry about that. We have to be out there, we have to communicate, we have to be on a lot of platforms. But what I would like to say is that each social media tool is different and gives you a different kind of return, a different quality of return. And to compare them one to another using the same metric is not going to give you the nuanced information that you really need about how to be effective with your communications and your use of the tools. So Twitter is about, just to reduce everything I said and repeat a little, is about getting my loyal, returning, more insular readers, more committed readers informed, and it'll drive a flurry of visitors right away who will probably come back and who will probably stay at my site, which is really nice. So homepages are not dead. Homepages are really important for that core committed audience, and that's why your homepage darn well better look good and be highly visual, and each of your stories should have a lot of visual clicks all around it. And there's only a couple sites that do that very well right now, and ours is not, off the record, quite there yet.
Yeah, no, Jim, please.
I just wanted to sort of add the obvious caution that we're all talking about the amount of traffic and how much attention we get and so on, but the basic job that both of us have is to tell important and interesting stories. And if there's a significant story that you want to get out there, whether or not it's necessarily going to have a lot of traffic in the same, it's very dangerous for reporters, I think, to look only, we talk a lot of the times about, we're so archaic, we still have the most emailed list, but instead of the most viewed or the most, whatever. But, for reporters to only look at that, there are a lot of stories that you would never have a budget story or a tax story or something that delves into detail. So that, there are significant stories that you should be pushing, whether or not, and that we should be writing. I know that's obvious, I just thought I'd throw it in.
Yeah, I'd like to make a point too, which is we're talking very, very big numbers here when we talk about, Facebook hits and web page unique visitors and whatever. These are all wholesale numbers. Circulation, newspaper circulation, that's the wholesale number. But a reader is retail. You get readers one at a time. You keep them one at a time, and you lose them one at a time. And one of the great things from our standpoint, at the Journal, is these new social media tricks and techniques make it easier for readers to get to us individually, one at a time. So when a reader is angry at me, they can get to me, and I can get to that reader, and I can engage in a little dialogue with that reader. And the very fact we can disagree vehemently, and the politics of the journal run the gamut, but they are moved by the fact that we have engaged. And that's a retail operation. They're my reader, they're my client, they're my customer, they're my subscriber. I owe them attention. And this has given me a way of directing attention to my individual readers. And that makes them loyal, and that makes them mine forever. I had an editor when I was first starting out who said, because letters to the editor I thought were weird. It was a weird thing. And he said, Lee, we pay attention to the letter writer because that one person who took the trouble to write a letter probably represents at least 100 people, probably more. And I think in the same way, the whatever metric or strategy or tactics we have about Twitter or Facebook or Snapchat or God knows what will be next week, that one person who's taken the trouble to figure out how to direct message you on your Twitter feed represents Lord knows how many people, but they represent a reader who is so engaged and cares so much about what you're doing that they reached out to you to yell at you. I mean, that is so precious. Really. Over here?
Sorry. Sore back. Dave Malmquist from the Virginia Institute of Marine Science, College of William and Mary. I have a two-part question. One is whether any of you see any value in distribution services such as Vocus, Newswise, EurekAlert. And secondly, not to put it out there. Secondly is when sending pitches, sort of what your feedback is on targeting reporters versus editors.
Interesting. Do I have a volunteer? David.
Well, I would say, I read EurekAlert every day, and I find it very valuable. And it's kind of a fun game because I run down there, and when I see something that I think would be of interest to people, I get my little squirt of dopamine or whatever, and it feels good. As far as editors versus reporters, I don't know, the Huffington Post, it might be different elsewhere, but there's really less and less of a distinction between those terms. I'm editing, I'm occasionally writing when I get time, and it's really kind of a living, breathing organism where I think all newsrooms sort of are. People are jammed together in long desks, long contiguous desks, and we're yelling back and forth. We're chatting continuously online and through the air. So I don't see a distinction between the two.
Robin?
Yeah, same thing. Again, think like a journalist. You're a PIO, you're an editor, you're a reporter, you're a staff writer, you're a blogger. Think like a journalist. So the same approach works.
So we're archaic, and we still have a big division between editors and reporters, and the editors just send the releases to the reporters and say, what do you think of this? So it does make sense to send it to a reporter. It makes sense to send it to the right reporter. I get a lot of medical news, and I don't do that. And so I spend a lot of time deleting stories that are really kind of unrelated to what I cover. I mean, if it's some, more crazy animal sex, I read the whole thing, even if I'm not going to write about it. If it's a cure for a dread disease, even if it's going to save millions of people, not my problem.
Brandon.
For what it's worth, an alternative perspective on EurekAlert and the press releases, for me, actually, if something is press released or on EurekAlert, that raises the bar for whether I'm going to cover it or not. There's a much lower chance of that because, it's already out there. There's going to be lots of other people doing it. It's, I'm going to have to work that much harder to find something unique. And quite frankly, maybe, the world is better served by having me write about something else because we don't need 100 articles on the same thing. But that said, I think it's again the importance of making that press release on EurekAlert as good as it can possibly be, and just making sure, and this connecting to what the fellow from the Department of Homeland Security was saying about how to deal with general assignment workers, writers who don't know science very well, that press release has to be as in-depth as it can possibly be so that they can't hurt themselves on it.
Yeah, David, follow up, and then
Just
Corey.
real quick about that. One thing I think might be helpful, a lot of times when I do write a story, I'll look at a press release. If I'm writing something from a press release, look at a press release, get some details, kind of figure out in my head what it's going to be, maybe write a few sentences, and then put together a set of email questions to the investigator, and then go off and do my business and hope that it comes back to me within the next 30 minutes or so. And if you could encourage your scientists to respond to answer questions via email, they'd probably be much less likely to get misquoted. I think that email interviews are a great way to go to make sure things get straight. And if there are mistakes, and look, we all make mistakes. We're working very, very quickly. Obviously, you guys can correct it. Hopefully, you'll be nice to us, and we're pretty good about. I think in general, people are now pretty quick about admitting mistakes, acknowledging them, and correcting them and moving on. So it's not. I don't want to be. We shouldn't be looked at as enemies or idiots. That we get something wrong. We're working super fast.
Corey.
Yeah, actually, I want to second that point about email interviews or just email explainers and backgrounders. I mean, I think if you warn your researcher, look, this is the day the press release is coming out. Clear several hours and just be prepared to do quick turnaround emails, because to me that's incredibly helpful. If I can email one of the primary sources and say, I didn't understand this part of the story, and can you just sort of tell me quickly how you did this? And that may be all that I need to write the story. I don't need to corner them on the phone for half an hour. It makes a huge difference. To the value of things like EurekAlert and Newswise. I think I don't know. I still get these email blasts of here are 500 new stories on Newswise. Here are 500 new stories on EurekAlert, and those are pretty much useless to me. But as sort of a resource base, again in that kind of hierarchy of information, having all those releases on EurekAlert, and then having tweets or feeds or things that point to research that take me there, that I can find them as I need them. That is incredibly helpful. And I find actually I can make a critical comment of Newswise, since I don't think I'm probably less likely to offend our hosts that way. But I think Newswise frequently sends out these these kind of like emails in response to what's in the news. And then it'll be like 2 days later, there was a big typhoon, and here's some resources you can talk to. But by the time I see those things, they feel very, very old. I think that's the danger of sort of relying on old style mechanisms for distributing information.
Yeah, I should just want to address the first part of your question. And I have to acknowledge my prejudices here. I'm part of the group that set EurekAlert up many, many, many years ago. The thing that distinguishes EurekAlert for me is that it actually does make some effort to impose a journalistic standard on the press releases that it accepts for the site. And increasingly, as technology has overtaken us, that credibility of the site that is hosting these releases and making some attempt to vet them is a huge thing. And I know just from personal experience that in the back room, this is something that EurekAlert spends a lot of time dealing with, particularly, say, for instance, now with the rise of what we all like to call the predatory journals, where the pay-per-page people, where it's just simply impossible to know, is this a reputable group that's posting this release? And that's something that EurekAlert tries valiantly to keep up with. We have a question right down here in front.
Hi, I'm Chelsea Toledo. I'm with the Pew Charitable Trust. Corey, you mentioned that there was a demand for sources who are young investigators or represent a diverse background that might be underrepresented. As the communications officer for Pew's Scholars Program and Latin American Fellows Program, that excites me. However, as you probably know, earlier in their careers, researchers are probably not going to have that big, gigantic breakthrough finding. It's incremental, and really what they're doing is coining new innovations of thought, and they're, who they are and how they're thinking and how they might evolve their field is what's exciting about them. with the lack of a big breakthrough finding, how do we leverage these people to you all as reporters and editors as credible sources in scientific news?
Corey, you're nodding your head, so why don't you dive in?
Yeah, one very straightforward way is that in many cases they are. I see lots of postdocs who are the lead researcher or the corresponding researcher on a paper, with more senior people in their department. And so I think in some cases it's a question of when there are multiple authors on a paper or multiple people involved in the discovery. There's a journalistic process and a selection process happening at the PIO side of things of who's the person who you want to push out there. And I think there's a natural inclination that you push out the most senior, best known name, but maybe that's not the most articulate person, maybe that's not the most interesting person. Often that's not even necessarily the person who is most involved with the research. I often contact the point of the sort of official point of contact, and the response is, "Oh, you should actually talk to my graduate student because she's the one who really did the work." So I think being aware of that and kind of actively pushing against that alone, I think, would make a big difference.
Elizabeth, did you have something you wanted to contribute? I couldn't tell.
Just to echo those points, I think that we really want to talk to somebody who can tell us, exactly how this was done, not just from a theoretical standpoint, but somebody who was hands-on with it. And, it's great if that person is young and energetic, ultimately we want really good quotes.
And Robin?
I believe a little point of fact, most Nobel laureates did the work for which they're honored very early in their career, so I'm actually not biased age-wise or anyways. Just always go back to the data. Where are the good stories?
So we have a question in the back here? Oh, I'm sorry. I beg your pardon. Brandon, please.
Just on the matter of incrementalism, by the time that breakthrough comes along in science or nature or whatever it is, when you're going through the references, you see that, it's referencing 50 papers and these people have been doing, all of this incremental work building towards that. And it was just as interesting at every step of that process as it is when the actual breakthrough happened. And so I think, think of it that way. You don't need to wait for the big breakthrough if the research itself is interesting.
It's an excellent point. To the back.
Hi, Lisa Munoz with the Society for Personality and Social Psychology. It's at SPSP News. I had a question about videos. There's been a lot of talk of getting away from the talking heads in the videos. And I'm being pushed in the opposite direction of we need videos of our members talking about their research, particularly in psychology and social sciences where we don't have the beautiful planet images and we have more restrictions in terms of what we can show ethically, from lab experiments and things like that. And so I was wondering if you had any suggestions or examples of good uses of video in the social sciences and in psychology in particular. Thank you.
Sure. If they have to be talking heads, why don't you give them a pair of Google glasses and have them just record themselves as they're walking around their lab instead of sitting in a chair? Who else would like to?
Just real quick, this actually was, and this refers to this question and a previous one about talking head videos. I was thinking about, and I don't know if anyone here has seen this is not a social psychology thing, but the University of Nottingham chemistry department puts out some wild videos. Partly the guy who does them has a huge gray afro and old, I don't know, funny-looking guy. So it's fun for that reason. But also, I think he did one recently about what would happen if ice sank instead of floated. So it raises a whole series of questions. So it took something like he's a talking head, but he's interesting to look at. He's got a kind of a wild presentation. So if you can get them to grow their hair long or do something really weird, I think that would really help.
There are a lot of people who think Steven Pinker owes his prominence to his hair. Robin, you had something down at the bottom there?
Yeah, not every story should be told by video. Don't let them push you around like that. That's bunk, I really don't want to look at a talking head. Nobody does. The only time I would want one exception is Dance Your PhD. Those are great. Great videos.
There are occasional exceptions to every rule. A long time ago, PBS did a series with Richard Feynman. That's nothing but Feynman talking. And that was absolutely fascinating. So we have to judge, who your person is.
Pushback. Way in the corner there. Yes. Do you have a microphone? Can we get one too? Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't.
Hi, I'm Taz with PETA. Hi, Robin. I hear two contradictory statements. It's don't waste our time, and build relationships with us. So building relationships takes time, obviously, for it to be solid. For example, on Twitter, I have a personal account where I post personal things and things related to PETA and animal testing, which I'm involved with. But if someone's following me and they want to hear about PETA, but they could care less about my difficult stepson, then they might unfollow me. So, but I'm trying to let you know that I'm a real person behind the press release, and I'm not just bugging you because this is all, I have nothing better to do. So how do I deal with that contradiction?
Taz, we're buds. No, I mean, there are definitely ways, the face-to-face interactions that we can do at AAAS and other conferences, the personalized pitches where, it's like, hey, Robin, I saw your story on mobile phone use among women in the developing world, and I thought this might be an advance that you'd be interested in. Even if you don't know me, take a look at the best story I've written in the last 5 years and target me on that. So you can develop a relationship that way without wasting my time.
Yeah, social media is not a substitute for human contact.
Yeah, and actually, just extending that, reporters who actually, who know who I am. I mean, I think the standard used to be, know my publication, and I think that the standard, the bar has been raised a little higher. It's actually, know me. If you're targeting a prominent writer or a prominent blogger, and you send a release that shows absolutely no awareness of who that person is, you're you're much more likely to sort of fall into that "don't waste my time, you're in the trash heap" pile. But the flip side is that when you do show some awareness, and then and you have an opportunity at one of these conferences to actually approach somebody in person, in a knowledgeable way, that's huge. That's a very high impact kind of investment on your part.
I didn't realize I hijacked the microphone from this question down here earlier, so if we could go here. Yes, please.
Yes, hi, I'm Sue Duquette. I'm Communications Director at Health Affairs, where health policy presence, primarily journal, but other venues as well. My question was about Corey's comment about embargoes that are in the far future it's something he doesn't really want to deal with so much, because a lot of the reporters and editors I deal with ask for as much time as possible. In fact, I have a lot of staged ways of interacting with them. So my question is, if I contact someone, usually because our studies are very complex and nuanced usually in their findings, and if I contact them with a couple of days to go, I usually are told that this is really fascinating, but I just don't have time to dig in and give the story justice. So how do I deal with late breakers like you?
That's a good question. Yeah.
So actually, I mean, so a lot of the answer that comes back again to this personalized approach. If I'm dealing with with a PIO or a researcher who I know who says, I've got a paper that's coming out. It's probably going to be it looks like Nature thinks they're going to be publishing it in a couple months. I'll give you a heads up when it's closer. Yeah, I mean, I don't regard that as an embargo. That's an advanced tip, and there can be far lead, and I'm fine with that. It lets me do long range planning. It's really it's the generic and personal emails that have that are it has that big bold embargoed, and then you sort of read down a few levels and to find out when it is. It's the impersonalized ones that I think are really problematic, and that in some cases, like I said, sometimes they're very far in advance. Sometimes they include links, and you can go to the link, and the link is live, and the link is not embargoed, which is a very confusing thing to a reporter. That just happened to me. I tweeted out a story because I followed the link, didn't register that it was an embargoed story, and it was actually another scientist who said, "Hey, that's not supposed to be public yet," and I went and took down the tweet, but. You can't be relying on the reporters to be policing those things. So I think there's really there's two very different ecosystems. There's the personal relationship thing where long lead time is fabulous. I mean, I think it allows all kinds of stories to happen. But then there's that sort of that blanket release where it can be very problematic.
We have a question in this way. I want to get to at least 2 or 3 more because we surprisingly and sadly are nearing the end of our time here. So.
Hi, I'm Maggie McGuire from the Michael J. Fox Foundation. I wanted to ask quick about something that I haven't heard said this morning, which are podcasts. We use them in our own storytelling, and you have emphasized the need for visuals, but would you click on it if we put it in a pitch? Would you use it for quotes, background? Where does it fit?
Robin.
Yeah, we use podcasts a lot at Scientific American, and I know a lot of our other, the Times does great podcasts too, and I know Wired, a lot of, and everyone. So I don't use them a lot, but sometimes I get, when I worked at an outlet where we had more churn, I used quotes from podcasts, and I would basically say it in a podcast, or said it in an interview, or something like that. And, I think there's a lot of value for that audio, and also for our podcasts, I know that our podcast editor will sometimes take, I think they're called actuarials. He can pull that audio into his script and use it as well if he's putting out something real fast. So.
Yeah, Elizabeth, do you have any use for podcast audio in your line, or is it?
Unfortunately, CNN radio no longer exists.
No, but I meant as raw material.
Oh, but yeah, I mean, so we wouldn't broadcast it as radio or podcast, but I do sometimes listen to them for quotes. Yeah.
Jim?
I think we wouldn't use a quote from a podcast. I mean, we wouldn't use a chunk of a podcast. We have to talk to people directly. So, I mean, it could be useful information, but it's probably quicker to read it.
Yeah. Right. We're going to get right to you, but we're going to get to her first because she has the mic.
Hi,
Please get her a mic.
Emily Valentine with Padilla CRT. We're a communications agency that represents a lot of health and nutrition and food-related organizations. And another thing that I haven't heard brought up this morning, there's been a lot of talk about visuals and videos and imagery. Infographics is something that hasn't been brought up, and that's something that we've been producing a lot of recently for our clients, and are kind of in this phase now of trying to figure out the value of those to journalists. Is an infographic something that, if it's communicating research results or scientific information, that you might use, or do you generally prefer to create something of your own using the stats that we would put in a release or something along those lines? So I'd just be interested in your opinions.
At the Wall Street Journal, we are deeply in love with infographics, but we will not use your infographic unless we can have the data behind it. That's just a hard and fast thing. It's very irritating sometimes, personally, but that's our rule.
That's the same. At the Times, the graphics department has to have the data. An infographic is basically the equivalent of a story.
Yeah.
So it would be the equivalent of publishing a press release.
Brandon?
I think there's also an important distinction to be made between infographics and visualizations or visual aids, and whereas an infographic is telling a story, and for that reason I wouldn't want to use it either, I think there's a great amount of room for visualizations, which are essentially, like the figures you would have in a paper, just dolled up and maybe a bit clearer.
I'd like to go back here to the corner, and then I guess to here.
Okay, so just quickly, a comment about we can also help you that when you guys do our stories, we also work to promote that story, so we're promoting your sites as well. And I've had local reporters often, even in the AP Bureau, I'm from University of Buffalo, it's E. Goldbaum, or at E. Goldbaum. They also sometimes thank me because AP doesn't really tell their reporters where their stuff appears, and we subscribe to these processes and services that send us all their placements, so they're also thrilled, so it could be sort of a win-win. My point is also that our budgets and your budgets are shrinking, and so the relationship building falls away. We used to go to the NASW conference every year, and I haven't been in many, many years, and I just wanted to say so unfortunately, the personal touch is, for a lot of institutions, especially public ones, is going away, and the ROI question about how much your daughter is paying to go to college, that is the hugest story that media tell me about. I mean, they want to talk about that as opposed to the research that I want to tell them about. So is there some magic word in the subject line? I feel I only have the subject line. Should I tell you the name of the journal? Should I say it's embargoed? Should I say it's exclusive? Should I say cool video? Or do you get that all the time and it makes you delete it?
Actually, I don't get cool video all that often. Elizabeth, do you have let's just quickly go down the row.
Yeah, I mean, there's no magic bullet, but I mean, I do look for certain buzzwords. I think that the Blue Planet example was a great one where, I mean, when I see Blue Planet, you know, I want to know what that is, right? I actually do appreciate when in the subject line it says in parentheses, images available. That actually might make me click on it, or even video available. It doesn't even have to be a cool video, it's just a video.
I don't know exactly what the magic words are, though it's funny, there's a guy I work with who says, somewhat cynically, space plus danger equals clicks. So if there's an asteroid coming and we can say that it might give Earth a close shave, we know that will be of great interest to people. So I would say, the only thing I'd say is when you're putting these things together, try to imagine why someone, say, at a party would want to say, oh, wow, I read this or saw this incredible story that happened at Buffalo where they did X and found Y or whatever. So think about how people are going to want to talk about it, because that's what drives me when I'm looking at stories all the times. And some things are important and I want to cover them no matter what, but other things are like, wow, that's a great story. So that just...
I guess just don't bury the lead. That would be the main thing. I mean,
no, the subject line is the lead.
Yeah, nowadays, you know, in Twitter, that's you got 140 characters. That's it. So, I mean, the other thing is realistically, any reporter or publication or site that you pitch is only going to do some of the, you know, a small number of the things that they get. So the success rate is not going to be, you know, great all the time.
I don't know if there's a magic word for me, but I would just say think of it like a headline.
Corey?
Yeah, I'll second all those, but I mean, you also asked the question of sort of, you know, how you build personal relationships when you don't have the budget to do it, and I think the answer there is that you use some of these other tools. If I get a personal email saying, hey, you know, I saw your last story, that was really great. I may send you things from time to time. Just wanted to make contact. Something it's not a hard sell, and suddenly I know your name. Suddenly, there are things you can do like that, and obviously it doesn't have to be by email. You can use Twitter and Facebook also for communicating like that. It's a low effort, low cost thing to do. But again, anything that emphasizes the idea that you know me, you know what I do, and you're pitching specifically to my interests is very helpful to me.
Yeah, Brandon said what I wanted to say, which is write a good headline. So here's how to write a good headline. Have a noun in it, have a verb in it. It's for online. It's not for a magazine where you're going to have supporting images or anything else to give people cues about what it's about. Write the best darn headline you can. If the first word is scientists or researchers, I'm asleep. Don't do that. Research finds, no. If you can put the word mystery or first or cool, anything that's grabby, get that in your headline. So it should be 5 words or 6 maybe. 4 is too few probably. Just learn how to write good headlines. You can do that on Twitter. There are A/B headline writing tools. A/B headline writing means you divide your readers in a sample of half, and half of them see one headline, the A headline, and the other half sees the B headline. And there's a tool called Outbrain that we use to test headlines. Now, you have to have a pretty good sample size to have statistically significant results with that kind of A/B testing, but you could still take a look at what the results suggest. And you can use Twitter to just do anecdotal A/B headline testing for yourself.
Yeah, I do that all the time.
Super. And back here?
Hi, I'm Christine Ferrara. I oversee communications at the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton. My question relates also to a topic that hasn't been brought up, and maybe that's for a reason, and that's printed matter. Would you put printed matter in the same category as a phone call? For example, receiving a newsletter about current research. We may only produce 3 a year. That content's also on our website. But in the spirit of keeping you informed, do you read stuff you get in the mail?
I do.
It's high quality. I read it. I'm a former sociologist, so I love, there's a magazine that the American Sociological Association puts out called Contexts, and I bring that home and I put it next to, put it in the bedroom. I read that. That is really quality stuff. Some of these, institutional magazines are very well done. Those I take a look at. There are stories in there. There's 1,000 untold stories for every one that you guys pitch us, and I know it because I've done this work. So work with us. Tell us what those are. Give us clues about where to look for those.
Hi, Christine. So Institute for Advanced Studies put out that little booklet that shows all the researchers who are there now, and I kept that for weeks on my desk and thumb through it and go, what's this guy doing? What she's doing? What's going on with that person? So, and I think what's interesting is that we get so little mail, or I get so little mail these days, that when some piece of print comes through, I take it home and kind of luxuriate, like take a bath and read it or something and think about it. So I think there's a difference. So to me, those are luxury reads, and if they're beautifully produced and they tell great stories, that's wonderful.
And Corey, you wanted to?
Yeah, but they need to be very specifically tailored to the medium. Obviously, paper press releases, things like that, are dead for a reason. There are a handful of things in print that I will read, similar to what Robin was saying. The Center for Supercomputing Applications puts out a magazine, and it shows you, all kinds of visuals, including a lot of visuals that are not posted anywhere online, because it's actually very hard to find some of these, and in-depth explainers of the different processes that they were using. That's a medium-specific kind of thing, and so when I get it in print, I understand why I'm getting it in print. It's actually very interesting to me. But if you're doing it in print, print at this point is sort of such a specialty thing. There has to be a very, very clear reason of why it's print as opposed to something else.
Yeah, I direct your attention to a wonderful article in the current issue of Scientific American about why your brain responds differently to paper in a positive way. We have a question down here, and I want to place an undue burden on you, sir, but this is the last question.
Great. I'm Ryan McBride. I manage social media at Novartis Institutes for Biomedical Research. And I'm wondering if any of you have any experience or plan to do anything with Vine or Instagram video. I know you mentioned Instagram for photos.
Elizabeth, do you have any thoughts on?
I know that CNN as a whole is doing Vine videos now. I haven't personally gotten into it, but I'm sure that's going to be in the future.
All right, sorry.
There are people using Vine and have posts. I know that also we're doing animated GIFs, which are kind of gimmicky but also can be really fun. So that's what we've done, a few of those things, which are great.
Not that I know of. I don't know.
I personally don't, but I shouldn't speak for Wired on that one. I'm not sure what their policy is.
No plans along those lines. The only one thing I would add is back to the earlier question about research video. There's some instances in which just pure raw video of an actual a simulation or an experimental result or video from a submersible, just not annotated, no talking heads, just the straight video. That itself, those are sometimes short clips there are very useful, but that particular video style, no.
I'd like to experiment with Vine a little bit with Scientific American, but we haven't had the bandwidth for it yet. We do take a lot of social media experiments there and try to see what's available for us. Instagram is like for me and my friends. It got bought by Facebook.
Yeah, kiss of death. We haven't, at the Journal, to my knowledge, played with that. We have experimented a lot, for instance, with something called Tout, which I don't know if you're... it's a video blogging tool, and we just made it available to every reporter. And our idea is to put up 10 seconds, 15 seconds of just raw video, whatever. And we were doing it in an experimental sense. We have no idea if anybody's interested in this, but I think, as it has emerged in our conversation here this morning, nobody knows if anybody's interested in any of this stuff. And the only way to find out is to try it and get invested in it and learn how to use it and then discover it was a complete waste of your time. But if you don't experiment, you will never know. Now, this was I'm sad that I have to now do this, but this conversation is now officially over. But our panelists, who I think have just done a spectacular job this morning, will be hanging around for a little bit, and maybe you can take some questions. But yes, thank you. But you really owe yourselves a round of applause because your questions were fantastic. Now, I do get the last word, and the last word is, please complete the surveys located in your registration packets and turn them in to the registration desk prior to leaving, because actually it's a big help to know for the people who put this on whether any of it actually worked or whether we just wasted all of your time. But I thank you very much for this morning. Thank you.